Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto unlocked gamer system with infinite skill trees? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Patch Notes in the Rain. The rain had a way of erasing mistakes in Konoha. Chalk from pranks bled into gutters. Soot ran off rooftops in black threads. Footprints became just water as the night settled into a soft hiss. Naruto skimmed along the eaves as if born with wet tiles under his sandals. He was still half laughing at the look on the guard's face when the paint bomb flowered above the gate, bright orange in the downpour. Perfect for exactly 2 seconds before the rain ate it. He'd timed it on purpose. Nobody would have to scrub. A good joke, not a mean one. That mattered. He was flicking to the next roof when he saw the old man in the alley. The stall bent under a sea of blue tarp. Wind made the plastic snap like a sail in a storm. The old man cursed as it slithered free again, trying to take the baskets of plums with it. Naruto dropped to the mud before he could think it through. "Here," he said, grabbing one edge. "You hold that corner. Wait, you have rope. What do you think this is, boy, a house?" The man grumbled, but his hands were shaking and grateful. "Market opens at dawn. These plums bruise if you even glare at them." Naruto didn't glare. He pinned the tarp with his body, shoved baskets back from the water line, then fished for the rope. Not rope, twine. He bit it to split the fray, looped it around a bent nail on the stall frame, and tied a knot that Iruka had made. Tie in a classroom 100 times until Naruto had learned to hate it. Now it made sense. Wet fingers, scarce time, no room for pretty. Pull, set, it held. As his palm flattened the last ripple, so. Nothing moved in the corner of his vision. Not rain, not wind, something that looked like both and neither. A translucent line that rose from the act like a blade of grass sprouting in fast motion. It branched once, twice, then settled. Faint as breath on glass. Seed acquired. The words didn't come from outside. They didn't even sound like words, not exactly. He felt them. They tickled the underside of thought and were gone. Naruto blinked hard, getting rain in his eyelashes. The line hung there a heartbeat longer and then thinned so much he almost couldn't see it, but it didn't vanish. It drifted toward him, toward his chest, and swam into him like a fish released back to the river. He looked down at his hands. Same scars, same dirt. The old man was squinting at the knot with grudging respect. "Huh," the man said. "Market knot. Didn't think any academy brat remembered those." "Sure," Naruto managed, and smiled because the alternative was saying, "Did you see the tree grow out of me?" Hat didn't feel like a sentence you started with strangers. The tarp snapped again. He threw his weight on it, lungs full of rain and night, and somewhere inside him a new line budded off the first. So faint he only knew it was there because it made the world line up for a second. It made this problem small. The knot held. Naruto checked the baskets one last time and stood. The old man kept his eyes carefully on the stall, which Naruto recognized as a Konoha kind of thanks. "Don't make it a big deal, kid, just be seen doing the right thing." He didn't mind. Being seen doing the right thing was something he had started to want. He bounded back up the wall. When his hands hit the top of the gutter, the line inside him fluttered, a leaf in a breeze, and unfurled a fraction more. Branch available. Improvised fixes. Okay, he whispered into the rain, teeth crowded with a new grin he couldn't stop. Weird. The rooftops were still his. He ran until the rain softened to mist. He slept 2 Saint for dreams and woke with water still in his ears. The academy smelled like chalk and dust and a little bit like fear. Graduation day always smelled like that. Iruka's voice cut the room in clean lines. Sasuke hadn't bothered to sit near the front. Sakura had, and she didn't look back when Naruto dropped into the chair behind her. He tried not to notice that. He had other things to keep him busy. Like the faint diagram hovering in the edges of his sight. Not a diagram, really. A suggestion. A sense of where weight could go. He didn't talk about it. He tested it. Shuriken drills. Iruka called their names. They stepped up, threw. Adjusted grip, threw again. When it was Naruto's turn, He paced to the line and watched Sasuke's 3 shuriken arc in a perfect triangle into the straw. Naruto hated how clean it looked. He hated how much he admired it. When he lifted his arm, something threaded from him to the air just ahead, as if the space remembered Sasuke's release. The line brightened to a thin gold. Naruto didn't think. He matched it, but not exactly. He added breath where Sasuke had held it and found, somehow, that the 2 lines didn't clash. They braided. The shuriken kissed the straw. A thread he hadn't seen before flickered between 2 faint points in his mind. One point that tasted like clone work, one that felt like his breath in cold wind. Synergy line. Clone left right arrow wind. Condition. Movement in rhythm with another. Closing square bracket. His skin prickled. He threw again, this time letting the second shuriken ride the turbulence of the first. They clipped each other and corrected mid-flight, the second snapping into the same hole. Even Iruka blinked. Not terrible, Iruka said, which meant, that was very good, please do not make a face about it. Naruto made a face anyway, but small. The written exam was less simple. Words rustled like tall grass. He pushed until the letters stopped swimming. He didn't know the answer to the trick question about historical treaties. He did know you could make a guess that gave the proctors the thing they were fishing for. He picked the option that was more human than technical. Maybe it was wrong. It felt right. When it was over, the classroom surged into the hallway's narrow throat and shook itself into teams. Team 7, Iruka read, and Naruto's heart tripped because it always did. Uzumaki Naruto, Haruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke. Kakashi arrived late, because that was apparently his thing, and looked at them with one eye. We'll meet on the roof, he said. Say your favorite things as if you thought about them longer than 10 seconds. Naruto did not say ramen. He wanted to. He didn't. On the roof, he said. I like when a hard thing cracks because we pushed together. I like. His throat surprised him. I like people laughing because they feel safe. It felt too honest after it left his mouth. He resisted the urge to snatch it back. Kakashi's eye creased. Sasuke looked away like he hadn't heard. Sakura looked like she might. The line inside Naruto shifted. A thin, almost transparent bud unfurled toward the 2 of them and then closed. Not yet, it suggested. Earn it. Weapons shop, afternoon. Metal smell like Rain's cousin. Tenten was behind the counter. Elbows stained with ink and oil, hair pinned up in a way that said she'd stabbed one of the pins into the bun so it would hold, and it had. She didn't look up when the bell rang. If you've come to ask for a free kunai because you have a good heart, I'm going to make you sort the bent shuriken. It'll take 2 hours. Don't test me. I like good hearts, Naruto said. But I'm not that shameless today. She glanced up, mouth quirking. Uzumaki, right, I've seen you in the practice yards. You move like you learned from watching birds fight. Naruto wasn't sure if that was an insult. They're good at not dying. They waste a lot of energy flapping. I have a lot of energy. Tragic. She wiped her hands. What do you need? Something that lets me cheat without calling tea cheating. Ah, Tenten said, warmly. So you want tools? We have a scroll with modular seal plates. Prototype. It hates humidity and thinks about exploding sometimes. Is this the part where I say I have a good heart? This is the part where I hand it to you anyway. She slid a case onto the counter. The sealwork was clean in places and grimy in others, like the person who'd made it had gotten excited halfway through and then very tired. If you use ink wrong, it will fuse in an angry way. If you say, please, it might not. Naruto cracked the case. He felt the new line in him each out like a child reaching for a sparkler. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. He smudged a finger across a crooked fulcrum rune. Branch. Improvised fixes right pointing arrow patchwork ceiling, sprout condition, fix under constraint. It felt like swallowing a breath of cold. I think I can make this behave, he said. Tenten's eyebrows tipped up a fractional degree. People say that and come back with singed eyebrows. Look at mine. He flashed her the unharmed, extremely proud things above his eyes. Very convincing. If it burns you, don't drip on my floor. She leaned as he dabbed fresh ink onto the wrongness in the rune. He didn't redraw it. He borrowed what it wanted to do and showed it a shorter way to get there. It was the knot in the rain, but with rules. The line inside him brightened. The scroll hummed, not quite happy, but less resentful. Tenten tilted her head. You didn't fix it. You taught it a trick. Same, but quicker. You're either going to live forever, she said, or blow up very soon. Can't it be both? He grinned. She snorted. He left with the scroll and the feeling he'd tricked the world in a way that would bite him later and be worth it. Kakashi was late the next morning too. By the time he arrived, the sun had already burned white holes in the dew. C-rank escort, he said, sounding like he was reading it from somewhere he hadn't wanted to look. You'll guard a bridge builder to the land of waves. You'll ask fewer questions than I expect. We leave in 10. There wasn't time to think about what the lines meant, there was only time to move. At the gate, Kiba yawned a hello with Akamaru tucked in his jacket. Shino nodded almost invisibly, and Hinata's eyes found Naruto for half a second and flicked away like birds to wire. He waved anyway. She waved back like she hadn't meant to, then seemed to decide it was fine. Kakashi said something to Kurenai low and quick. A moment later, Hinata fell into step beside them. Temporary reinforcement for the first leg, Kakashi said before Naruto could ask. Someone in the mission office remembered that we like seeing through things. Naruto didn't know if he was allowed to be glad, so he just was. They walked. The road unwound toward River Air, wet and moss sweet. Tazuna, their client, was loud the way people were when they were frightened of quiet. Naruto let him be. The line inside him kept ticking to the right. He didn't feed it. He tried not to look straight at it. It still grew when he didn't expect it. When the demon brothers came, it wasn't elegant, but it was honest. 2 lumps in the road that weren't lumps. 2 lengths of chain that wanted to be around Kakashi's torso. 2 hearts that had decided killing was a thing you got used to. Naruto's body moved faster than his idea of himself. He caught chain with forearm and felt the bruise immediately. Sasuke's foot made a sound like thunder hitting meat. Sakura's breath hitched and didn't break. Hinata did something with her palm that made a shoulder turn off. Naruto didn't get the last strike. He didn't need it. Kakashi peeled himself out of the fake death with a leisurely shrug. Good, he said. Nobody made a joke. I can, Naruto offered. Save it for when it won't get you killed. Kakashi's one eye slid to Naruto's forearm and seemed to note the bruise and everything it meant about where Naruto had been standing and why. Bandage that. We keep moving. Hinata was silent until the road narrowed to a plank bridge over a stream that had forgotten it was supposed to be small. She matched Naruto's pace with careful ease. Your timing, she said. Voice thin with breath but steady. On the first catch, was that? You matched Sasuke's. Naruto almost denied it. Then he didn't. Felt like it. He throws like he's answering a question nobody asked. I wanted to see what would happen if I asked it the same way. Hinata smiled with her mouth, small and certain. It worked. Sometimes things work because the world is being polite, he said. The words surprised him with how much they sounded like Iruka for a second. I want it to work even when it isn't. She looked at him long enough that he felt it like a hand on the back of his neck. Then she said, there's a breathing exercise we do. To slow the edges. She didn't offer to show him in front of the others. She just walked with him until camp, and after Tazen. And Sasuke and Sakura had found where to put their bodies and their nerves. She crouched with him by a stump and said, in for 4. Hold for 2, out for 6. The numbers were less important than the rhythm. The rhythm made the edges stop screaming. Something inside Naruto clicked into place and didn't feel like something he'd invented. It felt like something shared. The lines in him softened and braided. Bond node. Shared breath. Hinata. Effect. Steadier focus under pressure. He didn't tell her he felt words like that. He said, thanks, and meant it. It's nothing, she said too quickly. It's something. Her ears turned pink in the firelight. Maybe. The lake was only a lake because the mist agreed to it. It could have been sky. It was that wide. The water was so still that when a frog decided to be a frog and leap. The ripples looked like someone had drawn them with a ruler. Zabuza Momochi turned mist into more mist. Naruto could feel the difference between weather and intent. Kakashi stepped forward with a bored kind of readiness that made Naruto's hands want to shake and be still at the same time. This is where I say a scary title, Zabuza said, voice heavy, making the mist thicker. And you try not to look like my title worked. Kakashi said. I read reviews. They liked the early work. Naruto's laugh tore out of him before he could stop it. He bit it back down. It was a brittle, necessary thing. The first exchange wasn't the kind of thing you described later because the logic of it had only been true exactly when it happened. Water rose where there had been none. Kakashi's eye changed. The world did too. Zabuza's sword was a statement. Naruto learned a lot about statements fast. Protect the client, Kakashi said without looking. Naruto and Sasuke and Sakura moved. Hinata moved with them. The lines inside Naruto hummed like a kettle left on a little too long. The mist ate sound. He needed sound. He needed to make a new way to have it. He burned will like a match. It wasn't chakra. It sat somewhere lower and stranger. The world doubled, then tripled. He wove the clone sign and felt the familiar split, but he didn't send his other selves to punch and distract. He set them at distances where the air changed. He asked them to listen. They didn't have ears different from his ears. But in the corners of his mind, the faint synergy line between clone and wind brightened. Air threaded through each clone's chest as if they were flutes, and Naruto stood where the notes met. Branch reroute. Shadow clone right pointing arrow listening clone temp. Cost. Will strain. His hands trembled. The clones breathed in a staggered rhythm. Through the stagger, a pattern. Zabuza was not everywhere. He was a procession of movements he hadn't made yet. Left, Naruto said. Hinata's hand was already moving. Sasuke had already stepped. Sakura had Tezuna's shoulder and her feet where they should be. The sword kissed air, then hissed as it met the wrong place in the right resistance. Zabuza's chuckle was fog. Tricks. Kakashi made the same sound with less humor. He's learning. Naruto's clones were sweating. He was too. Will lifted splinters under his fingernails. He couldn't hold the reroute long. That was okay. He didn't need to. He needed windows. Listening was a window. When Zabuza caught Kakashi in the water prison, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like the next problem. Naruto ran at it with Sasuke on his right, and if he had been alone the stupidity would have taken him, but they weren't. Naruto's body remembered that breath Hinata had taught him and found the rhythm he'd mirrored from Sasuke's throw, and suddenly this wasn't one body running, it was a question asked by three. Naruto had a hand on the patchwork scroll before he had even made the choice to move it. Tenten's crooked fulcrum rune hummed under his thumb. He hadn't fixed it. He'd taught it a trick. He taught it another. He slung a band of seal paper from the scroll like a ribbon and let his clone pull wind through itself until the strip hummed. Wind didn't cut water. That was the thing, unless you changed which part of wind you were using. He drew it taut across the on like a string an instrument had been waiting for. The bubble protested. Sasuke did something with fire that wasn't about fire, it was about pressure. The string thrummed. It pushed the prison not like a knife, but like a key being fitted into a lock that had rusted shut. Rust gave. Locks sometimes did when they were asked right. Kakashi stepped out of something that had been a prison and became a thresher in human shape. The after made more sense than the during. Zabuza bled into his mist and went away in a way that didn't feel like surrender. It felt like he wanted the rest of the day too much to spend it all at once. Tezuna's knees knocked in a polite, consistent way. "You children are going to get me killed," he said, voice shaking. But that was. "Don't say cool," Naruto said. "Becca. Use his legs were the kind of rubber that only stops you from falling if your mouth is moving. Or I'll want to do it again." "You'll want to do it again," Sasuke said. "Yeah," Naruto said. "Probably." Hinata's Byakugan faded. The veins at her temples smoothed. She looked at Naruto's hands. "They tremble." "Yeah. Does it hurt?" "It's a good hurt," he lied out of reflex. She didn't call him on it. She didn't believe him either. They walked Tezuna the rest of the way into Wave. The country looked like a story that had worn out its spine. Houses that should have been brighter remembered how. DS ran toward them because kids still did that even when their world had taught them not to. Naruto grinned at each small face until grinning didn't feel like work. The bridge wasn't finished. It ached into the fog like a sentence someone had to stop mid-word because their breath ran out. Naruto loved it for that. He loved things that hadn't given up. They came in the gray before morning the next day. Haku's mirrors were the best genjutsu Naruto had ever seen that wasn't genjutsu. He didn't understand them so much as respect them, like a wall you knew would still be a wall even if you threw words at it all day. Sasuke moved in lines that wanted to be curves. Naruto moved in curves that wanted to be lines. They found each other's edges and cut their own hands on them. When the first Senbon blossomed cleanly through Naruto's sleeve and nicked his skin, he learned something about how pain focused the world. The lines inside him didn't get brighter because of it. They got colder. It wasn't a punishment. It was a choice he was being asked to make. How much do you let the idea of infinite tools change who you are? He didn't have an answer. He had a fight. Don't try to smash them, Sasuke snapped, eyes wild with light. You can't smash something that isn't trying to be smashed. Naruto almost laughed from the sheer relief of it. Sasuke was good when he was a little mean, he made the world simpler. I'm good at not smashing, Naruto lied. He wasn't, but he could be, today. He let the listening clones die. He needed their will back. He stole a breath from himself and spent it slowly this time. The synergy line to wind quivered like a wire. He could push air into the narrow spaces between those mirrors and make them sing to him. He could also suffocate. He split the difference. He took Tenten's scroll and didn't use it like a scroll. He used it like the world was willing to be talked into doing something it knew how to do, deep down. He fed the paper around the mirror's DGE like you feed a ribbon through a seam. The rune he'd taught to pivot found a pivot this mirror didn't want to admit existed. As the paper slid and hummed, he heard something that wasn't sound, a static thread under a note. It felt like the white of snow when you're too close to it and the sun makes it a knife. He had felt that after Zabuza, a sliver on the edge of listening. Here, it was welded into the mirror itself. Null residue detected. He didn't know what that meant, only that it had the taste of the opposite of everything inside him that wanted to grow. He went still for one fatal second, and the Senbon would have turned that into a grave if he had been alone. He wasn't. Hinata's voice was very calm in the gray. 3 degrees left. He didn't ask how she knew. Her eyes were back. He didn't ask how she was here. Kakashi's hand on the fight's perimeter must have decided one more set of eyes mattered more than tradition. Naruto shifted 3 degrees. The ribbon found a seam. The hum changed pitch. Sasuke lunged through an opening that hadn't been there and made it look like he had always intended to be exactly that fast. Haku was beautiful in the way storms were. Not kind, but honest. When Naruto got close enough to see the mask for what it was, a choice to be something, not someone, Naruto did something he would have argued with himself about later. He didn't stop because mercy is pretty. He stopped because killing as a habit felt like the same white noise he'd heard under the mirror's song. He moved with a parry that wasn't a parry, he moved with a redirect that owed Haku where the Senbon wanted to go if they were tired of being weapons. He took the sting himself and let it be shallow. Seed sprouted. Mercy parry. He didn't see Zabuza's kill. He heard the end of it. The sound men make when they decide something they can't decide and then do it anyway. He would carry that sound for longer than this fight. After, the bridge workers came out like they were learning to walk. They looked at the bodies and made the sound of people who couldn't afford to act like they weren't relieved to be alive. Naruto wanted to be angry at them for that, but then he didn't. He wasn't sure when he had changed his mind. He helped carry. He didn't make a speech. Sakura held Tazuna while he cried into the shoulder of the orange vest he'd mocked 3 days ago for being too bright. Hinata found Naruto under the scaffolding, where the water slapped the pilings like a teacher's gentle smack on the back of your head. Pay attention. The air was cool and smelled like salt and wet lumber. They didn't talk about the fight. They didn't need to. I don't like the white noise, Naruto said, surprising himself. He hadn't meant to say the part he didn't understand. Hinata didn't ask what it was. It feels like, she started, then shook her head. Like the world forgetting how to carry a sound. That's exactly it, he said, a little giddy that anyone could stand where he was standing even for a second. I keep thinking if I push harder, I'll drown in choices. You don't have to push harder every time, she said. She looked at his hands, and then, because she was braver than she thought, she put her arm over the back of one, just for one breath. Sometimes you pick what you're going to be good at that day. And you let your team be good at the other things. He didn't move. His bones didn't dare. I like that, he said. On days when I remember I have a team. You remember, she said. You remembered today, only because you were there to say 3 degrees. She smiled with her eyes this time. You were already turning. The moment didn't ask to be more than it was. They let it be that. They came home by roads that looked different in reverse. Naruto had a new way of noticing. The way old women traded recipes in voices that had survived wars, the way dogs took naps with the faith of saints, the way shopkeepers argued like arguing was a game they played to make the day louder. He didn't think he'd earned the right to be sentimental about it. He let the feeling move through him anyway. He didn't try to trap it. Konoha's market street made noise like a river. Near the noodle carts, 2 men were red-faced and building a dam out of their arms. The dam had a lot of words in it about whose stall went where and whose grandfather had stood where. Add the weathered weight of a fight they'd been saving for a day when their bodies needed blood that wasn't from a wound. Naruto watched them for a breath. He didn't like stopping fights because it made him feel like a hero, and he distrusted that feeling when it came too easy. But the old woman behind one of the men kept pulling her shawl tighter, like shrinking could protect her, and the boy by other stall was being taught by example that making your throat loud was how you solved space. Naruto stepped between them without stepping between them. He did it by accident and then realized it was a choice. He said, "There's a line that the evening vendors mark with their crates. Do you want me to get chalk so you can make it clean?" They looked at him like they wanted to bite. He didn't get bigger. He got smaller. He lowered his voice until the space leaned in. "Or we can pretend there's a line and you can tell everyone you were the ones who remembered it exists. I don't care who gets half a meter. I care about the kid who almost got his hand trapped when you dragged the stall." He shouldn't have known that. He'd seen it. It just hadn't registered. Now that he said it, he realized he had been watching instead of looking. The new lines inside him lifted softly, like a field in wind. Title earned. Ramen diplomat. He almost laughed from pure, ridiculous joy. Not because he wanted a title. Because it did exactly what the words chose. The air settled. People turned their heads as if hearing quieter. The men's faces went through 3 colors and then landed on, tired. Someone in the back made a joke about the chalk being expensive this season, which meant, "We can stop now." Naruto fetched chalk because sometimes the difference between peace and a fight was whether someone fetched chalk. He drew the line. It wasn't perfectly straight. He made one man stand on one side and the other on the other. He didn't make them shake. They weren't there yet. When he stepped back, he felt eyes like wind on his cheekbone. He didn't expect to see the Suna hit I-8. The girl wearing it had hair like sand fell into it and got stuck in a way the sand liked. Her fan was strapped to her B. Act like a door you didn't open without thinking about the consequence. Her mouth was a line that had learned how to smirk. "You diffuse fights for fun?" she asked. "Ramen tastes better when the market isn't on fire," Naruto said. "Most things taste better then." She watched him like she was making a list and he had just moved up a few places. "You're loud, Uzumaki. But not wrong loud. You know my name. You made a lot of noise on a bridge few people come back from." She flicked her eyes toward the chalk line. "And you know how to pick your noise." Her mouth tipped. "Try not to blow up." Oha's exam season is boring if the interesting ones are already dead. She walked away as if walking away was an art and she'd trained in it. Naruto watched her go until she was a slip of sand-colored motion in a crowd of green. He didn't know her name yet. He would. A monk in plain clothes stooped to pick up a tag from a crack in the pavement, turning it over once. His eyes were old the way bark is old. He smiled at nothing and tucked the tag into his sleeve. Naruto barely registered him. He was already letting the day settle into him like rain after heat. Under the noise and the new, something else moved. A whiteness that wasn't light, a hunger that felt like silence that had practiced until it learned to sing. He didn't know whose it was. He only knew he would hear it again. He tightened the strap of his forehead protector because the gesture made his hands stop shaking. He looked at the chalk line and at where the stalls would sit against it later, and at the kid now playing a game with a stray dog that involved throwing a peach pit and pretending not to be hurt when the dog didn't understand fetch. Naruto breathed in for 4, held for 2, and sent it out slow. The lines inside him loosened, then drew themselves into fewer, cleaner paths. A branch that wanted to explode into 1,000 possibilities chose 3 and brightened. Infinite was a sea. You learned to swim by choosing where to put your arms. The rain came back just long enough to make the chalk shine. Naruto tipped his face up into it and let it erase nothing, only underline. He had studying to do. He had a bowl at Ichiraku with his name on it and a seat beside him he hoped Hinata would take if she wanted. He had a weapons shop to haunt until Tenten kicked him out. He had a question about how Wind knew where to go inside a clone's chest. He had a title that was ridiculous and perfect. He had a city that chose to keep breathing. He walked. Chapter 1 end. Chapter 2. The Forest with Teeth. The Waiting Rue. For the written portion of the Chunin exams had the cheerful feel of a dentist's office someone had tried to put banners in. Naruto had never liked the academy's smell, chalk and old varnish and pank. Ill dust, but today it hummed with heat from too many bodies and too many eyes trying not to look nervous. Ibiki's scars were a kind of speech. He said the rules calmly, like cruelty didn't need emphasis to do its work. Naruto listened to the questions and thought, not for the first time, that a village that taught children to disbelieve what they wanted might be onto something. The page in front him made a soft rasp under his hand whenever he shifted. He didn't know half the answers. He knew what the questions were testing. Don't solve it, he murmured to the air between questions, a breath only he could hear. Decide. Every time the panic edge tried to sharpen, he held in for 4, held for 2, let go for 6. Hinata's rhythm made room around the numbers. It wasn't relaxation. It was space where thinking could happen. He let it happen. When Ibiki's last trap sprung, take the risk or take your pride home to explain, Naruto felt the old, prickly part of him snarl. Then he watched Sakura's shoulders square, Sasuke's mouth go flat the way it did when he decided a thing and would defend the decision on principle by lighting the world on fire, and he said, I'll take it. Ibiki smiled, like an executioner whose blade had just been sharpened for him. The paper went away. Naruto left the room with his bones still in his skin and the sense, not the line itself, but the sense, that song. Everything in him had grown without him watching. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a tool he hadn't had to use yet. The next proctor wore a coat and a smile and tennis shoes like she might vault. A fence for no reason other than the fence was there. Anko Mitarashi had the energy of a beautiful disaster and the mouth of an older sister who would dare you to take a midnight swim and make sure you didn't drown. She threw the sign in sheets like paper shuriken. Welcome to the part where the trees bite back, she said, teeth bright. Forest of death. Try not to become the fertilizer we warn everyone about. If you bleed, try to do it on your own time. Any questions? Naruto raised a hand purely to see if she'd bite. Do the trees prefer a marinade? They like bravado and tears, Anko said without missing a beat. You can offer both if you insist. The crowd laughed like it hadn't meant to. The forest crouched at the edge of the clearing, green so deep it read as shadow. Beyond the chain-link fence, wind made tongues of pale leaf flash and then hide again. Naruto felt the hush under it. Not the good kind. A hush like a room that had been emptied too fast. Kakashi leaned down between them, his book somewhere. His eye all there. You don't get extra marks for killing, he said. You do get extra lives for thinking. Breathe, then go. They went. The forest took their noise and ate it until the sound in their heads got louder. Naruto kept his breath simple and his steps simpler. Sasuke's gaze cut the path ahead into problems. Sakura tracked the map with hawk attention and quiet hands. Hinata moved like the world was more transparent for her than for anyone else. The first hour was only walking and pretending the feeling on their necks wasn't a gaze. The second hour found back at a moss-covered stump Naruto remembered because it had looked exactly like a crouching bear. He had tried not to think it looked like a bear the first time. It still looked like a bear. Loop, Sasuke said, discussed doing neat things to the word. Markers, Sakura said, already bending to knot a red cloth on a low branch. We're not the first to do it, but it will tell us if we're the ones doing it now. Hinata didn't speak at first. She turned her face slightly, the veins at her temples whispering out like a reminder that her eyes weren't a parlor trick, they hurt when they showed the truth. Naruto watched the way her shoulders stayed narrow and her neck stayed brave. He didn't like that he'd forgotten in Wave how much it cost her to see. They walked. The cloth came back too quickly. Naruto felt a fine crackle at the edge of his new attention, the same static under the mirror in Wave but thinner, diluted into air. He crouched by a fern and pressed his palm to a lacy frond. The air edged around his skin. Wind wasn't a thing he could hold. It was a thing he could ask. "We're not lost," he said. "Someone's telling the space to forget we've been here." "Genjutsu?" Sakura asked. Hinata blinked out and back in. Focus narrowing. "Not like the academy kind. The trees, their water moves wrong near certain points. Like someone is combing it." Naruto's grin was involuntary and wrong for the moment. He couldn't help it. "Then let's muss their hair." Sasuke made a face that might have been permission. Naruto split himself into three because three felt like a rhythm the forest might respect. The clones set themselves at the height of the low underbrush, where wind caught and stalled. He could feel the synergy line tug to the left, toward the way he had taught air to listen. He didn't need it to listen now. He needed it to carry. He didn't fight the branch, he asked it to bend. Seed sprouted. Trail of breadcrumbs. A dozen small, almost invisible threads of stirred air. Caught on leaf edges and hung like spider silk only a Byakugan could read. The threads didn't scatter far. They didn't need to. They just needed to be consistent. Naruto shook his hands out and swallowed. A little light-headed and very satisfied. "Can you see them?" he asked Hinata. She looked. Her eyes lit with relief, then pride, then a spark of amusement he had only seen when the mention of dog and cake happened in the same sentence. "I can lead," Sasuke said, not as a concession but as a choice. Hinata took on another inch of height that was all inside. They moved. With the trail, the loop broke. Naruto's skin stopped thinking it was a drum. He realized he had been hunched and let his shoulders drop, inch by inch, until they sat back where backs belong. The feeling of being watched didn't go. It shifted. The watcher didn't like being read. They were on the bridge of roots between two trees, so old Naruto had the urge to apologize when the first barrage of kunai came low and fast enough to read as a weather event. Sasuke's move was crisp. Sakura's guard was there before it should have been. Hinata called an angle in a syllable. Naruto felt his clones blur into moving air, not to block but to lean. The flow of the knives changed by a hair and planted in bark with angry patient noises. "Thanks," Sakura said, breath even. Naruto opened his mouth to say, "I got lucky," and closed it. "Yeah," he said, "we did that." Two figures slid out of a froth of leaf, faces masked with cloth that wasn't fashionable, it just had less smell than new cloth. Their Hittite were wrong without being wrong. Naruto knew Konoha metal and Suna metal and mist and stone and cloud. These were a church's idea of a village. The white thread of their chakra sang just off key. They didn't speak. They sang low. The sound wasn't a sound for human ears. It was a physical pressure at the base of Naruto's skull. The lines inside him wavered as if seen through heat. He felt reroute windows close like doors in a gale. You suddenly realize you don't have the strength to fight. Sakura frowned like a scientist. Sasuke's jaw clenched. Hinata made a small, involuntary noise as if the water of the forest had flinched. "Back," Naruto said, too calm for his mouth, and hooked the trail of breadcrumbs tighter in his mind, not to navigate but to hold himself in place. The two singers moved to flank. Naruto did something he hated doing in exams. He made a big show. He slipped his foot. He made his hand look wrong when it reached for a kunai, fingers too loose. He let his shoulders tell a story of confidence not backed by calculus. He painted himself like bait with his body. It worked, which made him respect whoever had trained these two just a little less. The left singer shifted into the opening Naruto meant him to see. Wind smashed from the right like a door. It wasn't Naruto's. It smelled like dry countries and lions decided into steel fans. The white cloth on the singer's face shredded. He skidded along the route like the forest had turned more sloped. A girl Naruto recognized from the chalk line afternoon. Sand-colored hair, iron fan, the gaze of someone who counted you because you were interesting. Landed on the next route with the grace of a drop of mercury. "Your exam," she said, almost apologetic, "appears to have picked up extra credit." She flicked her fan closed and planted it like punctuation. You should mark down that I saved you. We had it. Sasuke lied because it would have been impolite to admit otherwise. Her mouth tipped. Of course. And I should say I believe you. The second singer spat a mantra. The pressure in Naruto's head increased by a note and a half. The air around his branches fuzzed. He reached for a reroute. Just a small one, a twitch to coax the wind. Scatter to cling harder, and found the window crushed flat. Temari's eye slashed toward the canopy, not their bodies. There. Naruto followed it, above, where the leaf wasn't moving the way leaf should move with his trail's rhythm. The choir didn't work in pairs unanchored. There was a third, with a white hymn plate tacked to a limb like a holy notice. Naruto wanted it very much. You swing, he said, louder than he needed to the Sand Nation girl he hadn't decided to trust and already trusted. All pluck. He tied Tenten's launch scroll around a branch, felt the fulcrum rune hum under his thumb. He set a clone on it to pull wind like a stubborn animal to the right angle. Temari's fan made a sound like a flag deciding to become weather. The hymn plate flashed as leaf collapsed around it into a neat funnel. Naruto's seal ribbon shot through the opening and stuck with a little sister's meanness. For a breath there was white. Then the pressure popped. The two singers reeled like seasick men. Hinata's palm landed on the closer one's sternum as a correction, not a cruelty. He went down quietly. Sasuke's foot found the other's balance like a theologian finding an error in an argument. He also went down. Naruto's hands shook hard for 5 long seconds after. He didn't love that Temari noticed. He loved that she didn't weaponize it. That was sloppier than I'd prefer, she said, like a critique, not an insult. I prefer not being dead, Naruto said. We're aiming for perfect but we'll accept alive. Acceptable, she said, and saluted him with 2 casual fingers. Her teammates, Puppet Boy silent and Pin sharp, Redhead brother colder than he had a right to be, watched with the look people get when their world has contributed a variable they did not order. Try not to get arrested for having fun, Temari added, and leapt away. Naruto watched the hymn plate crumple. He wanted to pry it apart and see what sang inside it, but the forest around them was not done with its other song. They moved. The trail of breadcrumbs caught the quiet again and refused to let it be as quiet as it wanted. The grass nin with a long tongue arrived like a joke you don't want to get. Naruto. Knew Orochimaru by reputation and by the fact that Kakashi had a chapter almost blank in his book where the man's name should have been. He had never met anyone who made the air itself wish it could crawl backward. Children, the grass nin said, with the affection of a butcher patting a flank. You run well for improvisers. He smiled. His teeth looked like he polished them with questions you didn't want to ask. Sasuke's shoulders went strange. Sakura's breath shortened. Hinata's eyes stayed, which was a very brave thing to have them do. Naruto looked down at his own hands to avoid the flicker of panic that makes you lunge and get killed. His palms were very honest with him. They were damp, and there was ink under the nail of his right thumb from Tenten's scroll, and there was a scar Ram where he'd cut himself on the ramen stand when he was 8 because he had been holding the knife wrong to help Chuki chop green onions and didn't want to admit he had been holding it wrong. He didn't pull a knife. He asked, the only way he knew, for his lines to go quiet until he needed them to be loud. Orochimaru tested them without theatrics. He bent a branch by existing. The earth's slope changed under Naruto's feet. Snakes with chakra tongues came in from the right and upward because gravity had decided to slide. Sasuke moved in mathematics. It wasn't enough. Naruto tried the reroute he'd used at Wave. But the window slid shut so hard his teeth clicked. He tasted blood like copper, like pennies stuck under a tongue. Null pressure detected. Reroute windows jammed. He had 2 choices. He could try to hit a wall he was being told was not currently door-shaped. Or he could build something that didn't need the door. Tenten, he said to nobody here, and brought the patchwork Ling branch up through himself like a knit you dropped and caught on the way down. He'd taught the fulcrum to pivot. He'd taught it to find friction where there wasn't any. He could teach it to be a cage that breathed. Sasuke cried out, not fear, rage breaking into something like revelation. Naruto didn't look at the curse mark when it landed. He saw it reflected in Sasuke's eyes as if the boy were EA Lake and the pattern had been thrown there like a stone. Hinata's hand was already moving to block a follow-up that would have made the mark worse. Sakura made a sound like she was breaking an us. Ed motioned the way smart people do when they refuse to be wallpaper. She hauled Sasuke's weight into her guard and kept his head from cracking a root. Naruto burned will, not reckless, clean. He looped the patchwork around the place on Sasuke's neck where the seal writhed like a friendless animal. He did not try to erase. He tried to give the thing a smaller room. Splice successful. Seal spline temporary containment. Cost. Severe will strain. It made a sound in his head like a violin string you had to be careful with. The overgrowth tremor came immediately after, edges of his sight hissing. Hands finding a tremble he hated and couldn't bully into silence. Orochimaru watched like a teacher whose interesting student had just surprised him enough to commit his face to remembering the name. I don't think you're mine, he said. Almost indulgent. Pity. Naruto answered by not answering, because anything he said would be worse than his breath in his body. He put himself between Sakura and the worst of the snakes. He showed the snakes mercy like he'd learned on the bridge. Not weakness, a redirect that sent fangs clipping wood where they wanted to get skin. He let Tsusenbon find his shoulder. He didn't fall. He didn't try anything clever that would make him fall later. Orochimaru lost interest with frightening speed, the way storms do when they've decided a different street is more scenic. Good luck, he murmured. And meant the opposite, and went on to write other children's nightmares. The trees sighed without wind, relief like a wet cloth laid over a fever. Naruto sagged against a trunk that had not agreed to hold him but did anyway. The seal spline hummed steady and not enough. Sasuke breathed, asleep or close enough to it that the name didn't matter. Hinata was not shaking because she refused. She cupped water into Naruto's mouth and accepted the look he could not keep from giving her. Thank you, apology, stay, all in one. You did it, she said. Tenten did it, Naruto said. And smiled with a little too much tooth. I would be dead without Tenten's shoddy prototype. I heard that, said a voice from the greenery that sounded exactly like Tenten and also like someone prepared to be useful even if it meant getting her hands full of sap. She dropped into the clearing, hair pinned up, expression the opposite of panic. She had a pack slung heavy with metal and ideas. She knelt by Sasuke, by the spline, and whistled softly. You taught it to purr. Only until it bites, Naruto said. He swallowed, breath back in the right rhythm with Hinata's numbers. Karen, what? Tenten blinked. The air, Naruto said, for once feeling entirely ridiculous and not minding it. It has. Another temperature. Somebody else is there. She's right, Hinata said. There. The girl who stepped from the brush had eyes like a fever dream and hair like a home you wanted even if you didn't know why. She wore a grass headband, which meant less than it used to. Her mouth was a wry slash. There was blood on her sleeve that wasn't theatrical, it was thin and honest and wet. She looked at Naruto first, and her eyes changed like when people lean closer to a fire. Who are you? Sakura asked, hand not leaving Sasuke's shoulder. Karen, the girl said, like the syllables cost less than they should. I was with a team that decided my value would be proved by leaving me tea. Oh, slow something down, that wasn't men with knives. Your boy with the mark doesn't die if I say so. Sakura's eyes turned into knives not with murder but with suspicion. Why would you say so? Because. He's not heavy enough for the amount of chakra crawling out of him, and your idiot over there, she said, tipping her chin at Naruto, is blasting an honest bonfire over the whole forest, and I'm not eager to see what likes bonfires. Because I have a mother's milk grudge against men who sing like white noise. And because I don't like unfairness that isn't fun. Naruto tried to say, thanks, and realized he hadn't given permission yet. He nodded, and the nod was a kind of trust he did not begrudge himself for offering. Karen knelt. She didn't touch Sasuke like he might break, she touched him like. She knew exactly where he would if he was going to and would hold there. Bite me, she said. Sakura sputtered. Excuse me. Karen rolled her eyes, tired and hotter than the moment should have allowed. Not you. Him. Here. She pressed her forearm near Sasuke's mouth, and when she looked up at Naruto her grin showed that she enjoyed saying outrageous things in times with no patience for them. I transfer chakra. If he bites, it's faster. I know, it's a kink waiting to be misused, spare me. We don't have time. Naruto glanced at Hinata, not for permission but because he wanted a witness for the reality of being a person in a life that was very weird. Hinata's mouth had gone soft and brave in the way it did when she made a choice. Do it, she said. Sasuke's teeth sank. Karen hissed, not entirely in pain. Naruto catalogued that exact sound for later embarrassment and moved on. Color returned to Sasuke's face the way weather returns to a sky that had been refusing. Karen yanked her arm away with a vicious satisfaction, bandaged it herself, and stood. You owe me, she said. Done, Naruto said. For what it's worth, she added, almost an afterthought as she looked at the broken hymn. Plate Tamari had knocked from the branch, your clones taste like flutes. It's stupid, but I like it. Thank you, Naruto said. It's a compliment, she said, and sprawled by the trunk like a cat. She had decided to be in the room where loud things happened so she could make fun of them. I'm not with you. I'm not against you either. I am with not dying. Same, Naruto said. I can live with that. They didn't sleep. They closed their eyes in shifts and let their bodies pretend. When they moved again, the forest had remembered its old name and tried to be just trees. It failed. The choir's watchers had not given up when their hymn plate fell. Naruto's trail threads shivered in ways that made his molars ache. They set a trap, not the kind with spikes, though Tenten had 4 of those and liked them very much. The kind with attention. Naruto talked too loud in a clearing shaped like a coin, telling stories of wave and of a market argument and of a chalk line, nonsense that a careful hunter would mistake for carelessness. Sasuke walked as if he had room for a mistake he didn't intend to make. Sakura corrected their spacing 3 times and then didn't the 4th time, so that 3rd W. Old red as pattern and 4th as break. Hinata closed her eyes and found where water slicked wrong across bark. The first choir blade came for Naruto's throat. Mercy parry wasn't for blades, strictly speaking. He made it work, he hinted. The blade skipped, caught the edge of Tenten's pop-up anchor, and drove itself into a trunk. Karen was already standing behind the second singer, palm flat between the shoulder blades, telling his spine a very simple truth about pressure and regret. Temari's fan thumped into place from above. She didn't intervene this time, she watched. Naruto stepped 2 left because he wanted whoever else watched to mark it. Hinata whispered, 3 degrees left, like a private joke with life attached, and he obeyed a whisper with a warmth that had nothing to do with blood. The white noise battered his windows. He didn't fight the windows. He pruned. He chose 3 branches and let the others go quiet, fully, for the first time, listening clones to keep the map. Wind stepped to move when moving felt like a lie. Seal spline to gird the place where Sasuke's mark would always hum like a moth at a screen. The static lessened. He didn't understand the math. He had made the problem smaller than the hymn. The choir didn't like losing their quiet. 2 fell. 1 ran. Naruto could have chased. He didn't. He gathered trail threads and took what the forest gave for now. The night they finally had a fire. It was wise and small. It burned in a dirt hollow with rocks around it like a circle of stern antes. Kakashi would have approved. Naruto sat with his back to a trunk and his knees up because that was where breath worked best. Sakura ran a needle with hands that had learned in a week they had other lives to lead. Sasuke slept like he had punched his way there. Ian would punch consciousness into behaving when he decided to wake. Hinata drew lines in the dirt that weren't art, they were sentences about water flows and leaf shimmer. She spoke softly and ever. Why times she thought she was over-explaining. Naruto deliberately asked one more question so she would be forced to treat her own brain like it was worth hearing. Tenten had Tenten's delight. A prototype laid out. The light in her eyes that came when she realized she could build the thing they had needed 5 minutes ago and would need again tomorrow. Bond trigger, she said, meaning the weapon that changed shape depending on who held it. If I set the base matrix dumb enough, it will learn faster. Like me, Naruto said. Exactly, Tenten said, deadpan. I need 4 handprints. I want it to trust your rhythms, not your names. If you die, I don't want it to refuse to become useful because it's in mourning. Karen ate like someone who had been hungry a lot, which is to say precise and not apologetic. She watched Naruto over the rim of a cup and said, "Your overgrowth tremor is less pruned," he said, pleased with the taste of the word on his mouth. She nodded, almost respectful. You've learned the trick people know with power. The trick is not standing at the buffet forever. Did you just call my brain a buffet? I called your system a hungry god, Karen said. Don't feed it bad offerings. Noted, he said, even though the word made him itch. They named nothing and planned everything. Tamari didn't join them at the fire. She didn't need to. She had left a piece of paper tucked under a stone where Naruto would find it without it looking like she wanted him to. A sketch of wind corridors on the exam grounds and the note, in clean, thin script, if you call a gale in Sector D, it turns into a cyclone. Don't call a gale in Sector D unless you actually want a cyclone. Who leaves helpful notes in an exam? Sakura asked, half appalled. Someone who thinks the real test is bigger than this, Naruto said. Or someone who wants you to pass so you owe them later, Karen said. Same, Tenten added, enjoying the mess. Not always, Hinata said, quietly, and didn't argue. They made space for the possibility she presented without forcing it into faith or cynicism. Naruto fell asleep sitting up and woke with his head on his arms and his shoulder hot where Hinata's shoulder had leaned for too long. He didn't move immediately. He listened to how their breathing had found the same part of the dark and kept it. They made the tower with a scroll that bore enough SMU. DGES to be beloved and enough blood to be a record you weren't sure you wanted written down. The gate at the base of the big destructive calligraphy swung in as if it had been waiting for them specifically. Which Naruto refused to think about too much. Enko waited inside with a grin like a knife you don't mind in your house because it has better stories than you do. I expected at least one of you to be missing an ear. Sorry, Naruto said. We like having pairs of things. She looked them over and clicked her tongue at the seal spline humming under Sasuke's shirt, which had never been very good at pretending to be innocent. Interesting, she said, and for once didn't make a joke. Ibiki stood behind her like a negative photograph of humor. His gaze walked Naruto like a crime scene. He gave a micromillimeter of a nod to someone in a dark corner who didn't exist and then, apparently, to himself. Naruto felt the white under pressure in the room and turned his head. A monk in plain robes. Was sweeping like sweeping was how you prayed when you didn't have wards. His eyes were quiet and bright and not empty. Naruto had the sensation of standing in a song that did not use sound. The broom paused. The monk smiled. The feeling went away like a polite guest. Naruto filed the face away under, things to learn later. He let the relief of not dying land in his bones without throwing a party for it. Sasuke sat on a bench and breathed the way you do when you've promised yourself you'll sleep and know you won't. Sakura stretched her fingers and counted something that had nothing to do with math. Hinata took a piece of cloth and wrapped her hand with care for a bruise she had not mentioned. Tenten vanished to find a workbench to introduce to her prototype. Karen leaned in a doorway like a stray cat that had found a family and refused to admit it until it was too late. A tiny motion pressed just under Naruto's sternum, warm and unobtrusive, the opposite of the white hymn. It settled like a hand on a shoulder that didn't come with weight. Party formed. He didn't see numbers. He didn't feel a power flood. He felt a thread go taut between them and stay, the way tents stay up in wind because something agreed to hold. When he lifted his head, Hinata was looking at him with that calm that read as shyness to strangers and stood revealed, to anyone paying attention, as a species of steel. Sasuke was not looking at him in the way of boys who feel too much and manage it by glaring at a wall. Sakura's mouth softened. Tenten's laugh from somewhere down the hall had the sound of tools discovering they liked each other. Karen didn't smile. Her eyes did. Enko clapped once, sharp enough to carry. Sleep or pretend, she said. The people who want to use you know you bleed and breathe and kiss and argue. They like you better when you forget that. Don't give them the satisfaction. Naruto looked at his hands, at the ink under the nail and the Tarzan cut on the webbing between thumb and finger. At the tremor that had gone quiet because he had learned when to stop being infinite. The city could breathe because the forest had not kept all its teeth. The forest still had enough. He would not make speeches at the foot of this particular tower. He would fill his mouth with tea and something sweet and talk about nothing for 15 minutes with the people who had not died beside him. He would send a message to Tenten's shop that he owed her a lunch and her scroll an apology. He would show Hinata the ribbon of hair he'd made and ask if the Byakugan saw it do the more delicate thing he hoped it did. He would, tomorrow, ask Kakashi to show him where the white hymn had come from in the room he had not seen, and if Kakashi didn't know, he would ask women who did because Naruto had learned a thing about where knowledge lived. He was a boy in a room full of those who studied children for a living. He was also a person with a party now and an exam that had been about how to carry that. He slept. It wasn't enough. He woke with sunrise on his mouth anyway. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The City That Became a Dungeon. Naruto learned more from the prelims by not fighting than he did when he did. Between matches the stadium breathed sweat and dust and betting money. Hinata stepped into the ring against an older boy who had learned how to bluff weakness into surprise. She refused to give him the story he wanted. She caught patterns and interrupted them without gloating, her palms landing with the quiet confidence of a person applying a recipe she had perfected alone in a kitchen at 3 in the morning. When she bowed, she met Naruto's eyes for half a heartbeat with calm there, and some softer things she let him see because she'd earned the right to choose who saw it. Tamar. I dismantled her opponent the way a map erases a dead end. She never swung her fan for show. Every gust built the next. When the kid's knees finally gave, she was already looking past him at Naruto Lee. A math problem she intended to solve and then go get tea with afterward. Tenten, who had signed on as a proctor's aide because the exam benches needed someone who could give children clean bandages with not too sarcastic instructions, dragged him under the stands between bouts and shoved a roll of linen into his hands. Hold this, she said. She locked a device onto her forearm that looked like a bracer decided to moonlight as a toolbox. It unfolded with a sigh, showing a core of seal plates and 4 shallow depressions. Hand. He pressed his palm to one. She slammed his fingers shut and the metal warmed under his skin. What is it? He asked, not removing his hand because he did not want to break her rhythm. Prototype bonded weapon. She was not shy about enthusiasm, it was contagious. I call it 4-faced. It reads rhythm, not chakra signature. Yours is fast and messy. Hinata's is precise. Sasuke's is cranky. Karen, if she doesn't run the second I say this, has a predator's patience. It will shape to whoever's grip hits the trigger based on what you've taught it with your bodies. It's dumb enough to learn fast. Like me, Naruto said. Yes. Click. You're my favorite idiot. He grinned and didn't exactly know which part of him warmed at that. She slapped the bracer closed, then pried up a mesh insert that showed the whorl of his print like a map of rivers. Now promise you won't die before I show it off. I'm working on a strict no-dying policy, he said. Compliance is spotty. He returned to the stands in time to watch Shikamaru make a 10-second choice he would think about for the rest of his life. The arena was full of kids disguising wonder as bravado. Naruto didn't disguise it. He let himself want. He would have liked for the day to stop being simple right there. The genjutsu fell over the crowd with the softness of a blanket and the efficiency of a guillotine. For 3 heartbeats the world was a stadium. In the 4th it was a broken radio. Naruto felt it before the others started to stand slowly and blink fast and look at their hands like, this isn't how fingers move. He had felt the pressure in the forest, tasted the white under the mirror's hum in wave. He knew the flavor of the choir's work now. It didn't taste like a thing, exactly. It tasted like the absence of something, engineered. People slept like the genjutsu wanted them to. Others staggered to their feet and ran loudly because running felt like safety. On the field, sand unraveled into a thing with a face and sound. Nin leapt with wires for veins. The sky changed color in a way sky should not be able to. Naruto felt the lines inside him flare open on reflex, every branch screaming use me at once. He didn't. He cut himself down to 3. Listening clones. Seal spline. Wind step. He chose them as if picking 3 tools from a burning workshop while the ceiling fell, and put everything else behind a door that closed without drama. The relief was so sharp he almost swore out loud from gratitude. The overgrowth tremor, greedy for this kind of day, retreated to a manageable shake. Prune, he said, to himself, to the rhythm, to the world, so he'd remember the word when fear tried to grow 1,000 hands. Karen caught his elbow. Whatever you're doing, do that. Everyone's windows just got smaller. Sakura. He turned to her without looking for her, because he always knew where she was now. Your triage. Set a point by the eastern gate. Don't let anyone with a white hymn plate around their neck get near it. Don't punch anyone who doesn't deserve it. Define. Deserve. You'll know. He flashed her a brief, irreverent grin, and that was all either of them needed to remember. They joked because living was better when they did. Sasuke, he said, and Sasuke's cursed seal thrummed under the spline like a wolf in a kennel. You decide the line we hold west side. If a fight wants to be about pride, you make it about geometry. Sasuke's lip curled. Obviously. Hina. He looked. She had already started to move, not toward a battlefield but toward a stack of sleeping people who would be trampled by the ones who had decided not to be asleep. She was their Hana mother realized the cart she was pushing didn't have a baby in it anymore because the world had fallen sideways and her hands were only two hands, and Hinata found the child before the scream fully formed. She handed the baby back without a speech. No one would remember her face. Naruto did. Navigate, he said, and she nodded and breathed, in for 4, in a way he didn't need numbers for any more to feel. Tamari hit him in the chest with a gust. Not to knock him down. To point his head. Rooftops, she said. You want the white plates. They're anchoring on the temples and market spines. Then we take the plates, he said. Then we take the plates, she agreed, with a look that said she had been waiting for somebody to say it. Call your gale in the wrong sector and you'll get a cyclone. We don't need that with civilians. The choir likes regular grids, we can make a diagonal cut. Go, Naruto said, and their motions matched without either of them getting the satisfaction of deciding to match. Tenten snapped the four-faced unit off her arm and tossed him a companion piece that looked like the love child of a grapnel and a sewing kit. It's ugly, she said. But it wants to help. Karen closed her eyes like a maestro listening for an orchestra that was currently a riot. White pulses every 13, 12, they're adjusting. The anchor at the T district is the loudest. Listening clones, Naruto said. They popped like breath, not like surprise. He set them on the lip of the stadium, on a shrine roof, on the angle of a billboard that had been selling drying acts yesterday and today would sell panic if allowed. He pulled wine through them until their chests sang very faintly, a scale built out of rooftop air. The city had a throat now. Relay, he said, if one sees what the others need. Breathe once. They breathed. The notes carried. They moved on wind step. Not as magic, just as economy, a decision to spend muscle and air exactly where it counted, no grandstanding. From above, Konoha really did look like a dungeon some god had dropped their dice on. The alleys ran in regular arcs that had never felt menacing when they held laundry and gossip, now they were channels for panic. Naruto's title ticked under his sternum like a promise. Market, he hissed, and they skated along tiles. A hymn plate glowed faintly atop the archway like someone had a bright idea about aesthetics and the idea had been the worst one of their life. Tenten's arm snapped. The bond weapon unfurled for her into a cable and hook with sealed teeth. It bit the plate without knocking it free. Catch, she said. The bracer's face reformed under Naruto's hand, learning his pace in one shiver, turning into a disc with a faint, embarrassing fox engraving the metal had invented because it had spent too much time around him. Show off, he told it, and flung. The disc stuck opposite Tenten's bite. Tamari pivoted the plate with a fan stroke that was more thought than movement. The combined pull torqued the hymn sideways. Karen, eyes still closed, murmured, 3, 2, now, and Hinata's palm landed like a punctuation mark on the anchor seal below, injection of chalk. KRA at the exact angle that made the whole lattice forget what it had been built for. The pressure popped. 15 meters of street side. Naruto heard other streets breathe through the listening clones. The city's song changed key. A scream saved his life. Someone else's. A stall went over, metal legs sparking stone. A flock of Senbon came in low, innocent in that cruel way needles have. Naruto redirected the first with mercy. Because he couldn't not. It wasn't knighthood, it was habit, like catching a teacup before it shattered. The Senbon kissed the street instead. The listening clone on TH. E shrine roof coughed a warning into the network. 3 breaths later, A squad of genin Naruto didn't know cleared a bottleneck without stumbling into an ambush because a note had told them to look up. Next plate, Tamari said, breathless and delighted and scowling because she liked to act offended when things worked. They cut diagonals the choir didn't expect, snapping anchors, leaving the Genju Su grid with holes so big even civilians could walk through them. Every plate they moved wrong made the white noise pulse wrong. Karen laughed once, sharp and feral. They don't like improvisation. Poor dears. At the third market archway Naruto nearly fell off the roof from choking on the smell of burning paper. The paper wasn't a fire hazard, it was history. The archives building leaked smoke. Ike was making a point about mortal lives. An old man sat on the steps with his broom across his knees, calm amid the chaos like a pond in a storm decides to be anyway. Naruto's stomach dropped. The monk. From the market. From the exam tower. He moved toward him without planning to, like his body knew a habit it hadn't enjoyed enough to forget. The monk looked up, and there was kindness in his eyes that made Naruto wary. "Child," he said with the affection of a man who has been alive long enough to know the shape of affection as weapon and as defense. "Do you like songs?" Naruto didn't answer. Tamari turned her head a degree. Hinata's Byakugan veins stood out, but she kept quiet. Karen's mouth thinned and she shook her head almost imperceptibly. The monk, or whatever wore the monk, stood. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He just stepped into a space as if claiming it put a him underfoot. Painless pressure tilted the air. Naruto's branch windows shrank like they were being watched and graded and found insufficient. Abbot Suru smiled the way men in stories smile before they tell the part where they cut you very cleanly so you don't notice for a moment. "I have heard your instrument," he said to Naruto as if they were at a tea shop choosing seats. "The listening trick. The mercy trick. You are a generous boy. It is very inconvenient for my work. Try having a hobby that doesn't involve shutting people off," Naruto said, and was proud of the way his voice didn't shake. "You could, I don't know, start a bakery. Or a terrible band." Suru laughed. "It wasn't cruel. That made it worse. You don't know what you are yet. You think kindness and speed are going to be enough. You will learn to choose." He breathed, and the hymn rose, white on white, like snow turned sound. Naruto felt his reroute windows go from tight to paper thin. He baited a mistake. He telegraphed a lunge so obvious he'd be ashamed later, sending wind step too loud and too far. Suru SL. Ip to intercept with the ease of a dancer who had choreographed this fight on a floor no one else could see. 3 degrees. Hinata whispered, not loud enough for anyone else, and Naruto, who had been about to commit fully to the telegraph, rotated his shoulder the precise tiny amount that made the bait into a hinge. Suru's counter crossed the hinge uselessly. Tamari punished it. Her fan kissed Suru's sleeve. A cut so shallow it would insult any other opponent. It wasn't for blood, it was for position. Tenten tossed the four-faced. It landed heavy in Naruto's palm, changed shape with exhilarating, wrong-feeling trust. He didn't need to look to see the fox that had been too much. He felt the weight of a baton with seal vents. "Left plate," Karen said, eyes closed. "There is a plate you don't see. He's hiding it under his breath. It's under the hymn." "Under the hymn," Naruto repeated, and did not make the mistake of trying to be clever. The spline was for caging movement, he needed a cage for sound. He dropped the baton head into the crack between 2 tiles like he was planting a flag, and fed a thread of seal work down, not up. His fingers wanted to over-explain, he didn't let them. He hummed. A stupid little piece of nothing from his throat, a not song. The seals picked it up and resented it enough to get better at carrying. The thread slid beneath Suru's hymn like a rock under a river and caught. The hymn stuttered. Mercy, the parry that was never meant to bind, did something he had never asked it to do. It reached out and held for a breath. Branch. Mercy right pointing arrow mercy bind fleeting. Suru's eyes widened a fraction, and he smiled, not for show this time. For real, and in recognition. Then he did something Naruto would have assumed impossible on any day but this. He severed his hymn the way a man cuts off his own hand to escape a trap, and stepped backward into the pieces of his own silence, and was gone beyond the archive's corner like a moth leaving only the idea of itself behind. Naruto lowered the baton with hands that shook now. Tamari blew hair out of her eyes in a deceptively delicate gesture that meant, I do not like being almost killed between stalls. Hinata's fingers found his wrist for a second and measured the calm coming back. Karen's voice came out rough. You made a silent space under the song. Don't do that all the time. It makes other things look. I wasn't planning to, he said, and tried on a smile that was too tired to be convincing, and kept it anyway. A listening clone's note slid off key. On the far side of the stadium, the sky turned a color that wasn't in its catalog. Orochimaru's snakes braided themselves into a wall. Naruto saw the third on a roof through a corridor of trees and rooftops, for all the world like an OLD man meeting an old student in a classroom without walls. The line of their bodies said history in clean text. The giant barrier rose with a sound like stone remembering what it had been carved for. Naruto could go. He could run at that. He could be the boy who threw himself at the part of the story that would be easy to tell later. He looked down instead. Chaos always looks higher than it is. Up was theater. Down was work. Market Street. A woman trapped between a collapsed awning and a cartwheel with her dress wound like it had decided to strangle her. A boy trying to pick up his father as if his father were just a sack of rice that would behave if he loved it hard enough. A dog barking itself hoarse. A man in a choir tabard flipping a hymn played back upright with his toe. Naruto's tit pulsed once in his chest like a heartbeat through cloth. He made the choice and felt the relief of choosing. We hold the street, he said, and didn't apologize to the part of his heart that wanted to run at the barrier and be legend. Legends didn't feed the old woman with the shawl when her coins rolled into a grate. Legends didn't draw chalk lines. He had chosen the kind of legend he wanted to be, and it was smaller and braver. They turned the market into a wind tunnel that didn't blow people away. Temari's fan built gentle walls that firm hands could lean against without bruising. Tenten's four-faced reformed in Karen's grip into a compact device that ate shrapnel like a polite vacuum with an attitude. Hinata put invisible arrows in the air with her voice pointing the safest lanes, and people followed because they wanted to. Naruto stood where he could be seen but not sanctified. He didn't shout. He spoke as if talking to one person who was listening very hard. It's a line. Up there. He pointed with his whole palm because fingers looked like blame. You're safer if you cross it together. You, to the boy with the father, wait. Your father will breathe. I promise he will breathe. We'll give him a minute and then we'll lift with 3 backs. You don't have to be 3 backs. You can be one of them. He didn't know if the title was working. He didn't care. He saw shoulders go down. He saw the dog stop barking because the boy stopped shaking and the dog could borrow that steadiness. He heard the listening clones network fill with other small voices doing the same work, genin he would never meet. People who would never like him, and the sound of survival spreading. Sasuke came in at an angle with a smear of blood on his cheekbone and a face like a wall you needed a permit to climb. He didn't ask why Naruto wasn't climbing the stadium. He wasn't that boy either. West held, he said. How many? Naruto asked, meaning casualties and not being able to say the word. Not enough to be the worst day, Sasuke said, which was kindness so raw it made Naruto swallow like he'd bitten into an unripe fruit. Seal spline held at 60%. It's ugly but it works. We'll make it prettier, Tenten said grimly. As if violence was an aesthetic she intended to edit until it met her standards. A white hymn rose, closer. Naruto turned and saw Suru again, not in the person now, T in the pattern, the way the choir plates reoriented, the way the pulses changed tempo. They were falling back in good order. This had not been a route. It had been a measurement. Not all the plates, Karen said. But enough. They have what they came for. What did they come for? Naruto asked, already knowing and not wanting to be right. Karen looked at him with exasperation that was half mercy. You. The way you make the world grow faster around you. The way you prune. The way you make that not him and teach seals to act like children and like it. The way you are inconvenient to people who prefer simple gardens. I'm not a garden, Naruto said, because the metaphor made his skin itch. I'm a road. That's worse, Karen said, but her mouth softened. And probably true. They held the street until holding wasn't a decision anymore. They set broken carts back upright. They pulled one trapped shinobi free by the simple expedient of asking a dozen normal people to lift together in tea. Hen leaving so those people could look at each other with pride instead of deferring it to shinobi myth. The barrier at the rooftop fell with a sound that made everyone in a 4-block radius look up and feel the same thing without deciding on the word, ending. The rooftop where the third had fought went slick with ash. Naruto felt grief rise like a wave and saw it crash against 1,000 bodies. Who had to keep walking even with salt on their tongues? He didn't run to the roof. He stayed where he was. He took a broom from a stall and swept glass. The old woman with the shawl helped him at a pace that made the work holy. When the light finally admitted it had been afternoon for too long and should be evening now, Konoha was bruised but upright. Fires smoked in control, not glee. The choir had left him plates blacked and split in spots like lightning had tasted them and decided they were not to its liking. Suru had not taken Naruto. That felt like a thing you should celebrate with an idiot dance. Except celebration would have insulted the street. They moved in a small orbit around the work. Hinata cleaned a cut on Naruto's knuckle so gently he barely felt water. Tenten, still high on invention adrenaline, fell asleep sitting up with her chin on the four-faced and a smear of ink down her cheek that made Naruto's chest physically hurt with fondness for this stupid, brilliant life he had. Karen sat with her back against a lamppost and let her head knock it 3 times because she needed pain to remind her she had a skull. Sasuke stared at nothing with so much intensity Naruto suspected nothing was in pain and appreciated the attention. Tamari leaned on a railing 2 stories up and watched the way wind moved around Naruto's title. She didn't say anything. She did not need to. When Naruto went to the water pump to wash ash from his face, he looked up without intending to. The moon seemed too close. Not physically. With that same pressure you feel when someone stands behind you and reads over your shoulder. A clean, cold ripple ran through his branches, a tone he had thought only the choir owned. This wasn't hymnal, it was audit. Every tree in the infinite web inside him grew a fraction. Then stopped PD as if a careful hand had pressed 2 fingers against a pulse to feel it, to count, to catalog. His skin went gooseflesh. He didn't hear a voice. He heard lack, arranged beautifully. He looked at Hinata because she was there, because when the world turned strange he wanted the shape of her steadiness as a fixed point on a map. Her eyes were on the same slice of sky. She didn't flinch. She nodded like a person who saw a storm on a horizon and made room in her day to lash the windows and bake bread. Something older, she said. Older, he agreed quietly. Temari's fan clicked open and closed, once. Tenten, half asleep, muttered, "Don't let it touch my gear." Karen smiled without joy and rolled her shoulder as if testing bite marks. Sasuke's mouth went flat in. The way it did when he decided there would be a next day or he would make one. Naruto let his lines stay pruned down to the 3 that had gotten him and a good stretch of street through a day when he wanted to get rid of the messy parts of being alive. He could feel the branches he had locked turn their faces toward the sky like plants under a ceiling lamp, curious and ready. He could open them all and be a forest on fire. He didn't. He breathed with them. He let the older thing feel that he could be infinite and chose not to be. That his party was not a number buff but the arrangement of his heart. That his mercy wasn't weakness, it was how he liked to set the table. If the sky noticed, it did not say so. Night arrived honestly, lamps lit, some by jutsu and some by hand striking flint. And Konoha made that noise cities make when they decide to be themselves again even with grief growing wild in cracks. Anko passed by with bandages around one calf and a wad of candy in her cheek. She punched Naruto lightly on the shoulder, the kind of blow that says good job without admitting to softness. Eat and fall over, she told him. In that order. Bossy, he said. I prefer alive. She eyed the black tin plate bolted under the eaves. You broke their choir and you didn't break yourself. That's leadership, if you like words like that. I like the part where people get to sleep, he said. Then go show them how. She jerked her head at his team and the not exactly team who had put themselves where his gravity was. They'll stay at a stupid alertness until you drop. Dawn. Keep idiots standing for romance points. He made a face at her and she made a better one back. He returned to the circle under the half-fixed awning and peeled off boots that had become a second skin. He ate too fast. And then slower when Hinata handed him water like a ritual and held his gaze long enough that he had to breathe the way her numbers had taught him. Tenten mumbled, "I told you not to die," into the four-faced and drooled on it lovingly. Karen propped his foot onto her pack and jabbed a thumb into the arch until he yelped and then felt the muscle unclench with embarrassing gratitude. Sasuke didn't say, "Good call." But he sat where Naruto could see him, which meant the same thing. Temari came down from her perch at last and stood just outside the circle with an expression T. Hat looked exactly like the word considering. "You're loud," she said, in that half-smirking tone that had become familiar and also fond. "But not wrong loud. You said that before," Naruto said, eyes closing and opening because keeping them open required a decision he had decided not to be making right now. "I was right the first time," she said, and, after a pause, shortened the distance to Sta. Next to Karen and bumped shoulders in a hello that was actually a truce. "Your fanboy weapon is ugly, Tenten." "It works," Tenten said, eyes still closed, mouth still pleased. "Yes," Temari said, and there was genuine respect in it that would make tomorrow's arguments better. "It does." Naruto lay back and let the city's sound place a blanket over him, hammers in the distance fixing what could be fixed tonight. Laughter with too much edge that would be softer tomorrow, the low murmurs of house fronts where people told each other that they had been brave without using that word. He was not naïve enough to think this day had counted as victory. He was exactly hopeful enough to think it had counted as the kind that keeps cities from deciding they should be dungeons all the time. His lines did not sleep. They did not need to. He did, and they could watch the sky while he did. He would wake if the audit turned toward harm. For now, the older thing seemed content to measure. He reached up, without opening his eyes, and found Hinata's palm. She did not startle. She let him do that. He squeezed once and let go, because holding on too long would make it about a different thing than the one it was. He slept with ash in his hair and a broom at his side like a sword. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. At the roots of the sky. They didn't call it a council because councils made people feel like Histo. Rai had put on a robe and wanted to judge. They called it breakfast under a torn awning in a street that smelled like soap, ash, and someone grilling fish 2 alleys over for a price that changed every time a hammer struck. Kakashi stood with his hand in his pocket and his eye too awake for a man who had slept maybe a blink. Anko rocked on her heels, calf wrapped and grin cocked just to the side of mean. Kurenai spoke in a voice that made the brashest genin quiet down because they suddenly remembered someone had taught them how to sit still once. Shikamaru yawned and then remembered to look bored about his own yawn. Shino's bugs did something subtle that made the air circle instead of flee. Naruto listened while he pushed a rice ball into a shape that didn't exist and watched Hinata count T. He streets little rhythms without looking like she was counting them. The moon was gone now. The feeling of it wasn't. Storm fronts, Kurenai said, motioning to a rough map someone had drawn in charcoal on a shipping crate. Null pulses riding out of the land of rivers. 2, 3 lines, intentional. Temples in Fire Country reported static hymns at dawn. Choir symbol work sighted on shrine lintels, then gone like chalk in rain. Tacky, Anko said. If you want to be a cult, at least have decent fonts. They're not making a religion, they're laying cable, Shikamaru said, scratching his scalp. Rooting their grid. Try to think like plumbers. Monks are upgrading their pipes, Naruto said. Perfect. Kakashi's eye snagged him. We don't have the third to say no to anything foolish. So let's say it to each other. And then go be foolish smarter. Temari arrived the way wind does when it doesn't ask permission to be a breeze. She squinted at the crate map and made 2 fast changes. Their anchors lean to right angles. If you cut them on the bias, she slashed a diagonal through Konoha's streets with a charcoal stub, they're slower to adapt. Also, your ramen street oscillates. That's useful. It oscillates because people argue about the price of onions, Naruto said, because Konoha deserved to be known in the right ways, but noted. Tenten set the 4-faced on the crate. It shivered like a fox choosing what to be. I can get 3 forms stable on the fly. 4th is cranky. 5th is hypothetical. Working on it. Karen leaned into the edge of the shade like it was a habit. I can feel the pulses across rivers if I close my eyes and pretend to care. I don't have infinite. If you want timing, you pay me in silence for 10 seconds and someone telling me a joke after. Hinata nodded, careful and certain, and set a small stone on each corner of the crate. The water in the air changes around their anchors. If I talk, don't, she faltered, then finished because courage was a thing she took personally. Don't argue with how I say it. It won't be poetry, it will be angles. Naruto felt the world like a breath ready to be taken, and then a pause where you decide what that means. He didn't say he was scared. His body knew, and that was enough. Split, Kakashi said, as if he had been reading their rhythm. We keep the city standing and we go cut cables. Naruto leads. Rooftop diagonals with Temari and Tenten. Kurenai runs sieve lanes with Sakura and Shikamaru. Sasuke holds the west. And before you grimace, hold means geometry, not glory. Hinata navigates any team with a question. And if you tell her to sit out I will fail you as human beings. Karen will be somewhere she can hear stupid things happening before they get you killed. Her smile had teeth and pity in the same line. And pull you back from the edge when your windows shrink. Enko popped candy into her mouth and pointed a lollipop at Naruto like a commander with a flag in a silly parade nobody dared to mock. If something older than my sarcasm looks your way, don't try to flirt with it. Save that for people who bleed. Go. They went. The first null storm they could see was in the distance, moving like an idea through the land of rivers. The sky didn't darken, it dimmed. Birds took off in a ragged line and then dropped as if they'd forgotten how to finish the flight. Listening clones rose to the city's edges and hissed into the wind. The city answered. People had slept like they were daring their bodies to prove they couldn't. They were standing now, slow, sore, proud without admitting it. Naruto's title ticked warm and steady. Not a buff, a thread, west anchor, a clone breathed from a shrine roof. Market arch, plate under tile, 2 kicks from falling. 3 degrees of pressure on the second pull. Hinata called without looking up, eyes flaring and softening as if she were blinking between water and air. Temari can handle the torque. Tenten. Don't make it angry. It loves me, Tenten said. Voice bright with the joy of solving, and the weapon curved into a hook around her wrist with a hiss of seals entangling. They moved in the open, not sneaking but not making a show. The choir didn't attack with armies. They made the ground think different. Pieces of that difference showed themselves as hymn plates bolted in beautiful wrong places. Temari tilted them with fan strokes that were almost affection. Tenten bit and pulled with cable that had learned to find the fulcrum instead of brute memory. Naruto dropped his baton into stone and hummed under the hymn so Hinata see. Old tap it once and call the whole trick a lie. It was almost easy, and Naruto hated how the word sat on his tongue even as he wanted it to be true. In river country, the storm hit a village whose by just fear had been the way fish prices changed when 2 roads were washed out. Naruto saw it in the clone network like a body remembers a bruise. Lanterns dimming, roads puckering, men stopping mid-a argument because the space between their voices had gone wrong. Do we? Tenten started. We're not leaving, Naruto said. We're moving. The clone relay swallowed the moment between. Their bodies were still in Konoha. Their attention crossed the miles ahead of them like a bridge thrown down from nowhere. Temari plotted angles like you pour tea without spilling. Hinata read the water and air and the way doors remembered to open. Tenten shot anchors across a river mouth like a spider who had decided to be a civil engineer. Karen found the rhythm. Pulse in 8. 7. They always pull on the 7th like they're a bad temple bell. Naruto, if you, the baton, slide hum under the inhalation, not the exhale. Yes, now. They didn't fix it. The storm was off the leash of their hands. But they poked enough holes that people who should have drowned found a rope. Naruto listened to a woman call to her son and hear him answer because the hymn didn't flatten that last word. He felt ridiculous tears grab his eyes and left them. They dried in the next wind. Abbot Suru arrived at noon like a reed-thin promise kept. He didn't announce himself. He didn't stand under a banner that read moral hazard. East swept a street outside the old archives with the same careful attention he'd given to ceremonies, and when Naruto hopped to the roof edge above him, he looked up and smiled with genuine amusement. The fox, he said. Your hobby, Naruto said, is breaking radios while people are trying to say where it hurts. Your hobby is optimism. Suru tilted the broom so that bristles came to rest on a bolt of white metal under the eaves. You're very good at it. That sound is not a compliment, Tamari muttered, updating the wind's stance so it would catch a shuriken if one arrived without apologizing first. Suru ignored her with the polite detachment of a man who has chosen his pupils and will set his gaze nowhere else. Between us, he said low, the storm you think you're fighting. It's a tide. I shepherd tides. You poke anxiety holes in them and call that victory. Naruto put his baton head into the tile. He did not lick his lips. He did not look at Hinata on the next roof to his right. Even though his body wanted the dignity of her gaze. A tide can drown a child in a puddle, he said. If I can empty a puddle with a cup, I'll be happy to be useless in your ocean. Suru's smile sharpened. You're interesting. Your system, he said the word the way one says rumor, tastes like a wild garden. I prefer orchards. We prune for a reason. I prune too, Naruto said, and meant it without pride and without apology. Just not the same things. He hummed. Not at Suru. Under him. The hum slid under the white hymn. The broom tapped like he was pressing a key on a piano only he could hear. Hinata didn't move. She didn't need to. Her presence hardened into a point where she stood. Naruto had learned that a small thing can be the lever that moves the world. Suru breathed. The hymn rose. Naruto's windows pinched to mean. He let them. He chose 3 again. He would keep choosing 3 until the older thing looking through the moon got bored or admired him enough to take him seriously. Why me? Naruto asked abruptly. Because silence would make him slower. Why's your choir so interested? Suru's gaze tilted to the core of him and made his skin want to crawl out and be a different boy for an hour. You grow options like weeds, he said, almost fond. But you choose. People watch you choose and think they are choosing too. That is a mess to clean if your goal is mechanical peace. I'm allergic to mechanical peace, Naruto said. I know. Suru's hymn pressed down as gently as a pillow on a mouth. Naruto planted the baton under it. Mercy came up unbidden through his wrists, ready not to stop but to soften. Suru's movement made room for it, then snapped away like a man who understands his own reflexes well enough to admire someone else's and still take their throat if it comes to that. Tenten's cable bit the plate. Temari's fan breathed. Hinata's palm grazed stone with a whisper. Karen didn't hum aloud, but Naruto felt her counting his pulse with her eyes closed from 50 paces. For a brief second Mercy became something it had not agreed to be. Mercy right pointing arrow Mercy bind fleeting. Suru severed his own hymn again. Quick, clean, practiced, and stepped backward out of his silence like it was a coat. He left the coat on the broom. He left the broom. He was gone in a turn of a corridor, and Naruto saw the choice on his face as he vanished. Not contempt, not mercy. A promise to play a longer game than either of them had time for today. He keeps doing that, Tenten said. It's disrespectful. He's saving his hand, Naruto said, feeling both like a boy in a street. UPID street fightin' like a leaf that had learned to bend when big winds came but not break with them. He doesn't want to lose one to me yet. They broke 3 more plates. They ate something shaped like a bun and filled with stew that was half carrot and half good intentions. Tay sat on a roof with legs kicking into space and watched the sky. Remember how to be sky without a tide telling it to be ceiling. Then a ripple cut across every listening clone at once, so cold and exact that Naruto's breath left him like a piece of his body had been trimmed. Karen murmured, eyes still, this is the part where I say, don't move. And if you love me in a general and respectful way, you'll try. The light changed by a very small measure. In the street below, a hawker stopped in the middle of insisting that his peaches were exactly the thing to fix a widow's cough and stood with his mouth open because sound had found a higher rung on the ladder and refused to climb down. A figure stood in the mid-DLE of the street and made the street feel like it had always been a hallway to that spot. She didn't glow. It would have been gauche. She wasn't beautiful the way people sometimes tried to say angels were. She was arranged like a tool tray organized by someone who does not trust chaos to make good accidents. Her eyes were the color of algebra done to completion. A pale sleeve fell to reveal a WR East marked with lines that didn't read like tattoos. They read like the world had agreed to pay attention on her skin because she had asked nicely and then made sure to be obeyed. Shiratsuki Naori, Tamari said under her breath. Fan angled like a suspended thought. Please everyone try not to irritate the Archivist of the Moon. Naori looked at Naruto without interest and then with the sort of curiosity reserved for insects that glow. You are the wild root, she said, and her voice didn't disturb the air. It placed labels. A mutation in a garden you have not realized is curated. Naruto didn't like being an insect. He liked being underestimated by gods. It made him irresponsible. He breathed. He didn't smile. Naori took 4 steps and the plates they hadn't found yet burred against stone as if wishing to be closer to her. Choir operatives knelt in doorways like servants at a private show, their heads lowered because they wanted to keep their eyes. Kakashi arrived on the roof with no F.A.N. fare and everyone's attention found him without moving. He held his shoulders like the world had been allowed to touch him once and he had told it where. We don't have a word for her where it matters. He said in a tone that made even Naruto not quip, but I suggest, guest, for as long as it helps. Architect, Naori corrected, and lifted a hand. The world edited itself in a small radius. Naruto felt gravity change 3 degrees and roll like a coin. Hinata set her palm on the roof the way you place your hand on a sleeping dog's ribs to feel it breathe. Tamari flicked fan and found a pocket. Where wind stopped existing instead of the other reverse. I like your resilience, Naori said, and the words fell without judgment, landed without weight, acted without force. You have taught it small tricks. Useful for city geometry. Inefficient at scale. Good thing we like small, Naruto said. Villages are small. People are small. It's where jokes are. Naori blinked slowly, and the sense that the moon was a page turned almost politely. You have consented to a system. It will take you further if you let it. My system grows when I choose, Naruto said, because he had decided not to lie to gods as a general policy. Not when it drags. Naori regarded him as if she had been handed a new tool that worked in a way she didn't specify and was deciding whether to break it. Consent. Curious. Then she put the idea down and the city cracked. Not a single crack. A pattern. Observation gardens opened like white irises at the corners of streets. Circles where measurements got sharp and choices had to announce themselves. Choir hymns nested into those circles and made the air like a scale being tuned. A known shinobi technique rose against the observed space and bent like a reed under ice. Tamari, Naruto said, and didn't say please because their rhythm didn't need manners to be respectful. Wind silence, she answered, and drew a soft square in air that caught sound and set it aside like a bowl under a dripping roof. Inside the square, branches felt less looked at. Hinata's eyes tracked the garden's edges and marked paths around them that weren't sure until she drew them, and then were. Teams, Kakashi said, like a man splitting a glass of water for 5 people in a drought and making them feel like each got a lake. Kurenai's, with me, left gardens, we buy time. Naruto's, right gardens, you cut cable. Civilians are red on the map, make them blue. Naori tilted her head at the hum under the street that wasn't a hymn. Naruto didn't want to show the under-hum yet. It felt like giving away the good joke. But she looked right through the part of him that hid behind jokes. You put your sound under mine, she said, almost impressed. It's a bad habit, Naruto said. I'm trying to quit, she said, and the word had the physics of a thrown stone. He didn't, not because he wanted to disobey. Because he wanted to live. The baton slid into tile and hummed a dumb little boy tune that Sealwork loved like a stray dog loves a kind hand. A mercy bind flirted with the hymn and then didn't. He didn't waste it, he kept it for when it wanted to be born. Move, Tamari said, with wind pressure and with the kind of command she didn't apologize for. They moved. It became a walk through a household that was trying not to be a prison. Konoha was clever, it kept wanting to help. Naruto asked it too. He didn't scream. He didn't stand on a roof and orate. He and his party cut diagonals and took breath where breath could be safely taken. The choir flowed into gardens. And the gardens took what grew too fast and made it straight. Hinata was the hinge. She saw where the water went wrong and told the air to disagree. Tamari slid silence pockets in front of branches, so they could sprout without being audited. Tenten taught the 4 faced a polite shape for indoors and a cruel one for alleys. Karen timed their will like a miser and like a saint. You go now, not you, you hold or you'll fall. You give or he will. Kakashi's side bled in the places heroes bleed. Edges of districts where roads meet fields, and the first house always burns because flames prefer rooms to grass. Kurenai's voice held genjutsu the way a mother holds a fever, firmly, and without blaming the body for being human about it. Across the city the gardens kept opening. Uphill, down, in the market that oscillated. In the old archivist street where the broom lay with its bristles splayed like hair after a run. In front of the hospital, where Naruto refused to let a measurement circle decide who got the last room. Abbot Suru appeared and disappeared inside 3 of those circles like a man working a board with quick hands. Where he stood, the hymn took on a purr that made Naruto want tea. Oh, slap him for being pleased with the shape of his own cruelty. Naruto didn't try to catch him that day. He could. He chose not to. There's a way you become someone you don't like when you make a fight about catching, not saving. He didn't need that. In the afternoon the null storm rolled wider, thin tentacles stretching to the valley of the end like the storm wanted to see its reflection on the W. Ader long enough to learn how long it had lived. Naori moved toward it with the confidence of a person going to fix a door that keeps sticking. She looked back once, not at Naruto, at the street, at the bowls stacked on a step, at a child kicking a ball that refused to roll true and made the child giggle because sometimes falling is funny. Consent. The word had stuck like burrs in her sleeve. She walked out of the city and the choir followed like a long white shadow. Fronts, Kakashi said, breath thin and words precise. Pick them or they'll pick us. I have rivers, Hinata said, and her gaze was clear and fierce and very tired. The gardens lean on war. They don't know what to do when it talks back. I'll take rooftops, Tamari said. I like telling stupid structures where wind belongs. I have people at the hospital who need someone to decide for them. Sakura's voice crackled through a clone relay, angry and braver than a clean blade. I'll chase hymns, Shikamaru said with all the joy of a man volunteering to clean gutters on a holiday. They're boring if you don't find the right pressure point. Karen smirked. Tell me whose breath you need, when. Tenten slapped the four-faced. It split into 2, somehow. And then closed back up again, offended at physics and learning faster for it. Let's go invent something mid-swing. Naruto felt the pull of the valley the way a scar pulls on the weather. Kakashi looked at him without looking at him. Naruto nodded without needing to say, I know which front is mine. They ran without savoring that they were doing something cool. Running was work. You breathe. You listen. You don't try to be a poem about feet. The valley of the end looked like it always had, which was to say, 2 men arguing about the price of forever in stone, water making a case for erosion. Wind shrugging its old shrug. Naruto had come here as a kid to throw rocks and lie down under trees and imagine being important. Now he wanted a nap without ghosts standing over him. Naori stood knee-deep in the river and made gravity taste like mint. Water curved around her ankle without wetting the pale fabric of her pants. The choir strung hymn plates along the banks like wedding flags. White on white. You've learned to ignore a lot of noise, she said without turning. I asked it to sing softer, Naruto said. It's a negotiation. She turned, taking him in. The boy with a baton in tile that wasn't tile, a rope around his arm that wanted to be 100 tools and would never decide with a clean conscience, a woman with eyes that looked through water. Without loving it less for being in the way, a sand country girl carrying weather like a second opinion. A red-haired censor whose smirk would comfort you right up until it rolled you over with the truth. She looked at them like a collector considering whether these pieces belong together. You insist on not being an orchard. I've had worse insults, Naruto said. She opened a hand. The gardens bloomed on 2 sides of the valley at once. The air became a rubric. If you did a thing, it expected a score. Naruto tasted numbers for the first time in his life and spat them out like bad broth. His overgrowth tremor started immediately. Sweet and ugly. Every branch in him wanted to climb something it couldn't name. His hands wanted to sing with a noise he'd told them not to love. He could open every window and burn himself into a story he wouldn't like to tell. He looked at Hinata and didn't need numbers. Prune, he said. 3. Make it 4, Tenten said, already moving. Trust me. 4, he agreed. Listening clones. Wind step. Seal spline. And, he didn't say mercy because it was too fragile to say. He set it down gently where his body knew to reach for it. Tamari drew a wind sill. Ent's pocket over the nearest garden's edge, and Air chose to not carry a thing it had been asked to carry. Hinata threaded blue lines between stones, not with chakra alone but with the careful memory she had of how water flows when it is allowed. Karen put a hand on Naruto's shoulder at a fraction of a second that made no sense and saved his lungs from being audited out of breathing on the exhale. Tenten threw the four-faced and it shifted mid-flight into something with a fifth form that hadn't existed 30 minutes ago. A blade that wasn't sharp, a sound that cut. It stuck into a hymn plate. And played it backward until the metal forgot why it had left the forge. Naori inclined her head. Better, she said, as if they were students in a class she hadn't started. Then she pulled something. In the sky and gravity remembered it had an opinion about bones. Naruto's knees hit water. He tasted river. It tasted alive. He almost laughed from gratitude at that. Kakashi had once told him that in some fights you move not toward your opponent but toward your people. He did both. He moved toward Naori as if she were a shore and he a boat that had decided to be a person. Angled, off-center, at a slant that looked wrong to any observer who hadn't watched him fudge shuriken into the same hole 3 springs ago. Naori set a hand on him without touching him and tried to make his branches open for her. I want, she said. And the river changed its mind about gravity again. He didn't say no. He didn't throw a heroic speech at the moon. He chose. He closed doors. Not the emergency kind. The kin. You close when your guests are family and you're eating in the kitchen and you don't want to worry about the draft in the front hall. He locked branches. Not all. The shiny ones. The ones that would make a god tilt her head and call him useful instead of boy. He kept listening in wind and seal and mercy. He put everything else behind quiet and left the keys in a place in him that felt like love and not like power. The system didn't punish him. It made the lines brighter, tighter, steadier. World root node. Limits chosen. Naori's eyes sharpened. Consent, she said again, with something like, not admiration. But data that might one day be respect if you fed it and didn't startle it. Very curious. He moved then. Not fast like a boast. Clean like a decision. Wind stepped to the left under a gravity edit. Listening that turned Temari's fan stroke into a metronome for his feet. Seal spline that held his ribs where her audit wanted to take them. Hinata came in low with a hand that never learned cruelty. She found the seam in the edge of the garden and wrote a new path with her palm. Tamari hinged space without making a mess. Tenten made the sound knife again and this time she laughed, not because violence is funny. Because invention is. Karen took Naruto's will in a cup and poured it back into him one breath late so that his lungs never heard the command to panic. Keep your stupid heart on a leash, she said. Affectionate and furious. Naori adjusted gravity as if she were rolling a coin across her knuckles. Naruto heard the listening clone on the cliff pick up the sound of water wanting to be a sheet and not a spout, and he put his foot there, not here, because here would break an ankle and there would set him up for ridiculousness that looked like grace. He did not look ridiculous. It would have been rude to the river. Kakashi hit one garden with a jutsu old enough to have respect for itself and let it break on purpose to show the garden what breaking honestly looked like. Kurenai shifted perception around another circle until it lost the thread and tripped over its own rubric. Abbot Suru stood on the far bank with his hands folded into his sleeves like a good student at a performance. He looked like a man trying to decide if he was proud of the song or needed to hum lower. Naruto reached Naori. Mercy parry is not a technique to use on gods. He used it anyway, with humility and full knowledge that it might break his arm and be worth it. It wasn't a block, it was an offer. Here is where the violence goes if it insists on existing. I will aim it where it does least harm. He felt the bind bloom, for one flash, not as domination, not as cornering her into a shape, but as an agreement about how the next second should be shaped for all concerned with the least ugliness. Mercy bind consented. Naori startled. It was very small. The widening of eyes you only see on people who don't widen their eyes because they haven't had reason. She might have hated the feeling. She didn't. She noted it like a botanist finding a root system under a stone. He set the seal then. Not the spline. Something new the baton had been wanting to learn and hadn't had the good manners to ask. A living seal, stenciled into air and water and constant. It bloomed around Nauri like a woven basket that didn't squeeze. It wasn't a trap. He didn't have the cruelty. It was a set of doors with latches on both sides. Don't, he said, breath steady because his friends were breathing and therefore the world breathed, take without asking. Nauri looked at him like he had a child's drawing on a very expensive wall. And then, the older part of her went quiet. The part of her that turned roads into experiments leaned forward. She lifted a hand and pressed a finger pad to the invisible lattice. Locks accepted the contact. The thing held and didn't hurt. Consent, she said for the third time, slow as new math. You found a way to bind with agreement. Temporary, Naruto said. I like temporary. It leaves room. And if I don't agree? Her voice didn't taunt. It really wanted to know the answer on the page. He let her. I'll make it smaller, he said. Until battle becomes conversation. I'm better at the second. Tenten made a sound between a snort and a sob. Karen leaned a whole weight against Hinata's shoulder and pretended it was nothing. Tamari looked like a person seeing a sandstorm split around a village because someone had dug the ditches right. Nauri glanced at the choir at the bank like she had forgotten she had them the way you forget you have a clean towel until you need it. She tilted her head and the gardens closed, not with a slap, with a tidy roll. The plates clicked still. The storm over rivers went a shade lighter. Suru lowered his eyes. Not in guilt, in thought. You have made a leash with 2 collars, Nauri said. It is a novelty. It's a dinner bell, Naruto said. We can eat together or we can throw plates. Her mouth did not become a smile. Her eyes did, by a micromillimeter. You are small, she said. You are less inefficient than most small things I have permitted to keep being. High praise, Tamari muttered. Are you going to break the world? Naruto asked, because clarity was a better shield than posture, to see how the roots look when they're not ours anymore. Not today, Nauri said. This world remains interesting. I do not find it efficient to harvest an interesting thing at the beginning of its growth. She touched the basket lattice again, and with a permission that was simultaneously from her and from him, stepped out of it. She didn't tear it. She left it draped over a patch of air that would hold the shape for as long as the conversation wanted to last. Consent, she repeated, and now She sounded like she was writing in a ledger with a nice pen. I will return. I'll be here, Naruto said. Obviously, she said, and looked at Hinata, Tamari, Tenten, Karen with a cataloger's attention gentle as a clean blade. With them, she walked up the river and the gravity-remembered stone. The choir broke like a wave and retreated not in shame, in strategy. Suru turned his face to Naruto across the water. He inclined his head a fraction for the first time. Then he went like a man late for an appointment with his own conscience. Wind relaxed. Water remembered its argument with rocks and resumed it amiably. Birds tried 3 times and then rediscovered how to fly. Naruto's legs shook. He did not hide it. He bent, hands on thighs, breath in for 4, hold, out for 6. Hinata touched his nape, fingers cool and practical. He stood again. Tamari flicked his forehead protector with the strap of her fan in a gesture that said don't be a martyr, it's tacky. Tenten kissed the four-faced. Because she liked to scare propriety and then smacked Naruto's upper arm with the same hand. Karen said, idiots, in a tone that folded tenderness inside derision so skillfully he almost missed it. He laughed once, human and ridiculous. I didn't flirt, he said. You did, Tamari said. You just did it with ethics. Maybe that's my type, he said. Hinata went pink at the very edges of her ears. In a way that would have killed him if he were more fragile. She did not look away. She held his gaze like a hand. They walked back to the city by roads that had resumed being roads. People were sweeping. A man on a ladder hammered a sign back into a place it had been built for. The old woman with the shawl told someone that the chalk line had been where it should be and she did not have the energy to be surprised about anything else today. The hospital smelled like effort. Sakura had blood on her hands and the precise smile of a person who had made half a dozen life or death calls and put them in a row and chosen not to fall apart because it would annoy her later if she did. She brushed past Naruto and said, next time someone calls me civilian support, I'm going to bury them in charts. And he saluted her with absolute sincerity. Kurenai sat on a bench with a cup of tea she had probably earned by taking it without asking. Anko limped past carrying a bucket and yelling at someone tea. Oh, hydrate before she made them drink by force. Kakashi leaned on a post and read a page of a book as if to say, I've purchased us 5 minutes with boredom, spend them. Naruto bought noodles as a form of prayer. He sat on the curb with the bowl steaming into his face and did not narrate his day for a passerby because he had learned a thing about letting moments be their size. Hinata came down onto the curb next to him like a leaf deciding where to land and accepted his chopsticks for a bite without the clumsy trembling they had shared a day ago. Tamari perched behind them like a well-armed gargoyle, chewing and pretending she wasn't, almost smiling at the way Konoha made noise again. Tenten leaned against a post and oiled a hinge that would squeak loud enough to be a thread if she didn't. Eren stole Naruto's egg and dared him to challenge the theft. He let her. He stood when the bowls were empty. He should have made a speech. He did not. He went to sweep glass. A boy grabbed another BR. And made a face at Naruto that adults would later misremember as admiration and that Naruto understood as, it's good when you're here and it's loud. It got dark, finally, like a city that had decided to go on. Lamps lit in their dozens. Konoha didn't put on robes, it put on house clothes. The world's audit did not vanish. It stepped back into the ledger where big hands keep their books. They walk the streets once like guards and once like people who live here. At the market, 2 men who had been justified all day about onions leaned on their counters and insulted each other with a casualness that meant love. The chalk line glowed because someone had bothered to heat the tip of the chalk. Naruto came to the bridge over the little canal that had turned the second day of his life into a story because a cat had decided to jump onto his head and he had fallen in and been pulled out by a woman who had said harsh things while wrapping him in a blanket. He put his hand on the railing. He breathed. His lines in him weren't quiet. They were held. He didn't notice he'd reached for Hinata's hand until she was already there, squeezing back, the gesture cleaner than speeches. Tamari flicked the back of his head with a nail in passing. Don't ruin this, she said lightly. Go slow or I'll put wind between you and embarrass everyone. I like slow, he said. Tenten laughed like a hinged tea. Hat had been oiled finally did, a small relief sound. Karen leaned on the railing on his other side, eyes on the water as if it might show her diagnostic logs. You did your limits, she said. Keep doing them. Teach me when I forget, he said. I charge, she said. I'll pay. She bumped her shoulder into his. The contact said, idiot, and family. Night slid all the way down. The old awning was patched in 2 new places. He touched the seams with a ridiculous pride that made his eyes hot again. He tried not to think about how he'd be tired tomorrow and maybe the day after. He let the tea through and it made around it for ramen and sparring and Tenten making smoke in a back room because an idea had scratched her head, and Anko sabotaging a tie out with candy, and Kakashi's pages turning. And Sakura insisting that people fill out forms because forms were how you preserved lives when fainting would be easier, and the sound of a city refusing to be a dungeon. His system felt like a field after rain. Not quiet, growing, slow. He didn't want God level anything more than he wanted to be a boy who could make a chalk line where it needed to be and teach seals to behave and ask WIND to be kind and be loved by 4 people who had every right to have chosen someone else to stand by. He tipped his face up. The moon didn't feel like a teacher anymore. It felt like a visitor who agreed to not rearrange the furniture without asking. Come back, he said to no one and to everyone. We'll talk. The wind carried the word and did not make a show of it. It placed it somewhere safe. He should sleep. He would. He had a broom at his side in case the morning thought it could start without him. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Lanterns of the River. Morning made a soft racket out of Konoha, hammer knocks, pails on hooks. A child dragging a stick along a fence and finding a stutter every 3rd post. Naruto stood beneath the patched awning with a broom and a bowl of miso that tasted like salt and smoke and a night that had not killed them. The chalk line down the market lane was new again. Someone had warmed the tip over a candle so it marked clean. He swept glass like prayer. The broom made a rasp against stone. The rasp kept panic out of his mouth. Hinata arrived without asking for a place to stand. She took a rag from the stall and wiped ash from a signboard like it would mind if anyone else did it. When Naruto looked up, she held his gaze long enough for his breath to find her numbers without counting. Morning, he said, and heard the part of him that would like mourn. Ings to be regular and boring and didn't hate that about himself anymore. Morning, she echoed, smile small and not fragile. Sleep, like a rock being polite to a river, he said. Then the river was kind, she said. And they both laughed because being alive was an absurd thing to be funny about and good. Tamari brought wind to a stop in a square of air with her fan and then used it to blow saw dust away from a carpenter's eyes without dignifying his startled thanks with a reply. Tenten stumbled past with a roll of scrolls under her arm and grease on the curve of her jaw, humming the way Peo. Ple hum when they've done math in their head for too long and are trying to teach their body to sit down. Karen leaned in the shade and ate something with the slow satisfaction of a cat letting a room know it belonged to her. Kakashi slid out of a fold in the street like his book had kicked him off the page. Rivers, he said, and the way he didn't make it sound like an order made everyone move faster. Villages along the trade path woke up quiet. Not the tired kind. Names wouldn't come. Prayers came out like breath. Choir plates sighted under millstones and granary beams. Chapel of quiet, Anko said around a piece of candy, making it sound like a bar she would have gotten thrown out of twice and still gone back to because the bartender poured honest. Mission, Kakashi continued, I bright and soft and not kind. Because kindness isn't what you want from orders, cut cable. Keep people, no showy deaths. If you must flirt with older things, keep it PG. Naruto glanced reflexively up, and the sky did not lean down like a teacher, it hovered like a neighbor on a porch, listening. He looked back at Hinata and adjusted the strap on his forehead protector because hands doing small work got ahead of fear. Prune. 3 or 4, always, he murmured. Hinata's mouth curved. 3.5, he blinked. Half, we'll see, she said, and shouldered her pack. They left behind chalk, and sweeping and everything that could trick you into thinking life would stay that tidy if you were diligent enough. The road to the land of rivers was a green throat, wind ran through it and came out tasting like moss. Listening clones took the eaves of trees and hummed thin threads across the canopy. Trail of breadcrumbs tugged at narrows and withered at loops. Tenten's four-faced sat strapped up his forearm in a polite rectangle. Pretending to be modest, he didn't believe it. An hour out, the forest shifted. Not a sound, a pressure. The same white comb Hinata had felt in the forest of death. Moving water the wrong way along bark. Grid, Karen said. 3 plates. 1 anchor disguised as a knot on a branch because someone is precious. Left, Hinata whispered, eyes bright and vein shadowed, pointing without pointing. And a watch or 2 trees over with his foot angled outward, he'll run left if startled. Tamari lifted a fan slice that became a draft that became an invitation. The W. Archer took it like a man surprised at how obvious his feet had been about wanting a way out. Tenten's cable bit the knot and found a pivot with a little growl. Naruto set his baton into bark and hummed under the hum, and the comb snagged. He felt reroute windows pinch and refused to panic. He chose his 3 like packing for a trip you can't afford to get wrong. Listening clones, wind step, seal spline. He left Mercy close, not named. Named things sometimes behave. The grid popped. Pressure lifted. Birds cursed and forgave them immediately because birds have more practice at forgiveness than people. Nice, Anko said, satisfied like a woman who had just watched someone set a bone right on the first try. Let's go break a choir. The first village didn't look cursed. Curses that worked rarely did. People stacked crates, rolled barrels, watered ferns. They looked at each other with faces that had stopped speaking to mouths. When they tried to say names, the sound went around the word like water around a stone. Naruto crouched by a boy of 6 trying not to be seen, trying not to cry. The boy's father was a long muscle of a man pretending to examine a cartwheel. Naruto rolled a peach, hit along his knuckles and then dropped it disastrously. The boy giggled before he could refuse to. Naruto took the giggle as consent to be in the same space. Can you hum? Naruto asked the boy, and hummed a line too silly to be a hymn and too tidy to be a joke. The boy hummed back, small and brave. Naruto set his baton into the street between two stones and let the hum slide under everything else like soup under rice. Hinata placed 2 fingers lightly on the boy's wrist as if measuring a river flow. Tenten pointed at a beam under the millhouse roof with her chin and did not move to take it. Yet because she watched Naruto's mouth like it was a map. The boy's father turned in the act of pretending the wheel needed him, and the look on his face when his son said, "Da," and the second syllable, "E" found its own way home would have been too much even for a man more stoic than Naruto on his best quiet day. Naruto looked away on purpose, to let the moment belong to them, and caught Temari already not looking with surgical courtesy. "I hate them," Karen said, almost conversational. "Not with fire. With water. We'll take the plates," Naruto said. "Leave the names." The millhouse had a sweet, sour smell, grain, old damp. The patience of wood that had thought it would be a house and ended up a machine kept alive by anxious hands. The plate was exactly where it shouldn't be, under the millstone, face down. On the beam above it, a charm for good harvest hung with love and twine. "Gentle," Hinata said. "No cyclones." "Who do you think I am?" Temari said, wounded with pride, and then caught Naruto's look and relented. "All right, fair." Tenten threaded cable through gears with a dangerous delicacy, using the 4-faced like a seamstress's all with opinions. Naruto set the baton into foundation stone and hummed under the plate until Hinata's palm could kiss the beam and ask the wood to carry a different story for a second. The plate turned itself a fraction like a man reconsidering an argument and then came up soberly to Tenten's grip. The pressure in the room changed. Words tried to be born in the village and made it halfway across throats. Abbot Suru was already inside, broom in hand, because of course he was. He looked like a man who had wandered a story and found the page with his name on it by accident and decided to read it aloud. "I am not the villain you want," he said mildly, leaning on the broom. Naruto hated that he smiled a little. "You're the one we've got." Suru's gaze flicked to the baton in the stone, to Hinata's precise hand, to Tenten's cable that had learned where to bite, to Temari's fan angled sideways to keep the room's wind from thinking too hard about the door. "You find the seam in the argument and pull," he said. "We do the same. You pull until it becomes quiet," Naruto said. "Quiet is merciful," Suru said, and there was an old pain in it not put there for effect. "I have seen what noise does. Wars like that one." He didn't say which, they all knew the category. "Noise says, all your choices are loud. Everything about you is powerful and matters, and then it takes children apart to prove itself right." Naruto looked at him RLY for the first time, at the way Suru turned his head not quite all the way when someone spoke, at the way he watched lips each time and then reassembled meaning from silence. "You can't hear?" Naruto asked, gentle. It wasn't the question, it was the kindness asking for a foothold. Suru's mouth tipped without shame. "Not well," he said. "It is why I pray with brooms." "You want the world at a volume you can live with," Naruto said. It clicked through him like a branch strengthening at a wound. Suru inclined his head. "And you want it loud enough for boys to be boys without dying." "Not just boys," Temari said dryly. And Suru accepted the correction with a little bow. "I don't hate you," Naruto said, surprised at the truth. "I hate your method." "Likewise," Suru said, as if relieved. "I warned you the tide would feel like contempt." "I don't choose contempt. I choose tools." They stood in a mill around a plate that had ruined names. Naruto put his palm on the stone and thought of CHALK lines and ramen and a boy with a peach pit and a river at the valley that had decided to be a river even with algebra poured into it. "Let me try something unprofessional," he said. Karen exhaled like a curse and moved to his shoulder, fingers sliding to the place where his will got stupid when his heart did. "I hate that word." "Me too," Naruto said cheerfully, and set the baton deeper. He hummed, not under the hymn this time. Around it, a silly boy's tune, the kind you use to make a baby breathe slower because the baby trusts your breath. Hinata reached toward him, not touching, and had his pulse with hers until the room had 2 metronomes and didn't know which to pick. Temari slid a wind silence pocket over the plate so the sound Naruto was making wouldn't echo itself into nonsense. Tenten adjusted the bite a hair. A little sigh through her teeth like sealwork purring. Karen timed a half-breath push and pulled so the windows didn't slam. Bond node evolved. Shared breath right pointing arrow shared pulse small radius. Scales with trust. Naruto didn't see words. He felt the room pick a rhythm. People outside fumbled out syllables and found their own. Names blossomed and stuck like seeds. Kicked into dirt by accident and delighted to find themselves in a field. Suru watched with the look of a man at a performance he is too proud to like but too honest to call poor. You called a chorus, he said. It called itself. Naruto said, oddly shy. I gave it a beat. Not enough. Suru said, not smug so much as insisting reality keep its shoes on. There are 10 more mills, 50 more plates. The storm keeps learning. Kakashi's voice slipped through a clone relay like a note written on a sleeve. Teams in position. Choose fronts. Naruto met Suru's eyes, steady now. Then come watch while we try it at scale. I am watching, Suru said, which Naruto heard as, I'm not ready to call my god wrong. Not yet. They moved like the city had taught them. No legend making, no flourishes. They cut diagonals through fields and over creeks that tried to pretend they were rivers if you squinted. The choir's plates made nets that wanted to be music. Tenten's cable pierced nets in their least elegant point. Tamari did her bias cuts. Hinata's Byakugan read water's truth better each hour and said the words that made alleys forget to be traps. Karen found the wrong notes and put her thumb into them until they turned into breath. People came to doors and watched. When words returned, some were angry, most were tired. The angry ones had hands that wanted to fight. Naruto let them be ang. Rai while he drew a chalk line in front of a granary and told a farmer where to put her cart so the wheel wouldn't crush a child's fingers if he ran. You keep doing that, Karen said, not unkind. The little lines. I like lines, Naruto said. They're honest. They can be moved when they need to be, but until they do, everyone knows where the barrels go. The 6th mill was a trap that didn't act like one. The floorboards had been rubbed with something that made chakra feel like molasses. Naruto's windows pinched to pinholes. He heard the hymn before it sounded. An observation garden opened the yard with a footpath through it like politeness. Naori walked onto the path as if she had been strolling and found her way here by accident. Architect, Tamari said in the range of awe that Nded like sarcasm if you didn't know her well enough to hear the respect pulling the sarcasm's leash. Naori didn't look offended. It was probably impossible. She watched Hinata steer a family out of tea. He gardened by placing her hand 3 times where water wanted to go. She watched Tenten bite a plate and then deliberately let the bite go because it had teeth under it, and Tenten didn't like to be by things that hadn't introduced themselves. She watched Naruto place a baton into dirt and hum around the garden circle like he was trying to coax something to the surface instead of demanding it. Consent, Naori said, more like a notation than an epiphany. You used it on me. Her gaze flicked to an empty place in air that remembered the shape of the basket she had stepped out of yesterday. Now on a village. It's slower, Naruto said. He didn't apologize. People don't get rebuilt like roads. Naori made the almost smile with her eyes he was getting used to, as if she were allowing the possibility that a new tool could be useful even if it didn't match the drawer. Your leash with 2 collars doesn't bind crowds. It invites, Naruto said. People do the binding. Unreliable, Naori said, unbothered. Human, he said. Her hand twitched in the air the way it had when she had tested the basket. Show me, he did, not because he thought he could prove a thing to an archivist of the moon. Because boys in fields had started to hum stupidly around barrels while they lifted them so their hands moved together. Because old women counting beans found their fingers moving in the same rhythm and words fell out like beads onto threads. Because Hinata said, in for 4, and the family repeated it. Because Tamari clapped off beat once and everyone laughed and the garden's rubric shook like a teacher rediscovering she preferred mess to obedience. Because Tenten struck the 4-faced against a plate and found the 5th form by accident, a bell with a soft voice that vibrated YMN work backward until the line drawings forgot themselves. 4-faced. 5th form stabilized, resonant bell. Karen stood behind Nato and pressed her thumb into the latch of his will when it tried to go for a bad door. Don't get high on saving people, she murmured. We're not saints. Rude, he whispered. Accurate. The garden thinned. People said their names like they were reintroducing themselves to themselves and meant it. Naori looked at Naruto again, not pleased, not displeased. Too slow for my purposes. Not useless. High praise, Tamari muttered. We should embroider that. Tease. Uru entered the yard from the lane's other end with his broom, like the natural phenomenon he was. He paused when he saw Naori, and for the first time his composure cracked, not in fear, in the strain of a man who worships the idea of silence looking at the author of a version of it. He bent his head. Naori did not acknowledge him, which Naruto could not decipher, as this rudeness, or the way of a wheel. Der forgets bricklayers when she stares at a wall. Abbot, Naruto said. Wild root, Suru said, a little wry now. His head tipped as if tasting the chorus Naruto was trying to teach a village to be. You keep insisting. I like living, Naruto said. Suru set the broom down gently, as if putting a child to sleep, and lifted a hand. The hymn didn't rise like a tide this time. It came up under her feet like the floor deciding to become a wave. Reroute windows slammed. Naruto felt the old itch to burn will until sense shut up, and didn't. He pruned to 3, breathed with Hinata, and let Ari draw a pocket of silence like a curtain on a stage. Tenten struck the bell. The bell answered like a sound that didn't want to be a weapon but was willing to be a tool. Mercy came up unbidden and he led it. It wasn't a shield, it was a way to tell the violence where to step so everyone kept their toes. He tried the bind, gently, asking Suru's edges if they wanted to feel held and then decide. Suru's mouth twitched, not in anger. In pity for a boy who didn't know the ocean. He severed his hymn, clean and fast, but he didn't leave. He stood in the chorus like a man in a river who has never liked rivers and hates that he admires this one's current. You're teaching them a beat, Suru said. You think the beat will stop knives. I think the beat will make knives rarer, Naruto said. Rarer is not never, Suru said. Never is God talk, Naruto said, and Naori's face marked the word as if he had said it to her on purpose. He hadn't. He didn't mind that she thought he had. Suru looked at Naori, and Naori gave him nothing. Which in her world might have been permission or indifference. He looked back at Naruto. Quick lesson, he said. The tide is learning your trick. It will mimic chorus and steal breath. Karen snorted. Then we'll steal it back. And again, Suru said, not unkind. Until you get bored, Naruto said, and smiled because even when this was terrible, being human had jokes. And he loved that too much to hide it. Suru made the not smile again and left, broom tucked like a staff against his shoulder, the way men walk when they don't know if they will pray or fight ahead but know they'll be there. Naori lingered one more breath. You will invent faster if you prune, she said. I know, Naruto said. I chose my limits on purpose. She watched him as if he had never heard one of her gardens told no politely and meant it. Then she tilted her head, wrote a line in an invisible ledger, and went. They didn't win a war that week. They turned 5 villages blue on Kakashi's map and left 3 still half-silenced like ears after thunder. They tore plates and learned where not to tear so beams didn't sag. They taught 3 rhythms and listened for 4 more. They became problem-shaped people in rooms that believed their problems were weather. Naruto spent nights sitting on stoops, ladders, and once on a water barrel that didn't like him. He didn't preach. He hummed when asked, and sometimes when not asked, and lent his baton to a child who wanted to tap it against the ground because it looked like something that could be tapped. He met a woman who wrote names in a book when she got them back and then scratched them out when they left again and then wrote them back again and didn't apologize for the mess of lines. He gave her chalk. She drew a line across her doorstep for herself and stood on the right side of it and breathed. Tenten stole a farmer's toolbox and fixed hinges until the village sounded like a place that opened and closed properly again. Tamari climbed to a roof and made shade out of wind that stayed and cooled a room with a baby in it because the summer had come early and didn't care about other things. Hinata took a boy to the river and taught him to float until his body remembered trust. Karen told 3 men to stop trying to be heroes and lift together. She did not say please until after they did it, and then she did. And they sat down shaking and didn't fake anything. On the last morning before they turned back for Konoha, Kakashi tapped Naruto's shoulder with 2 fingers and pointed somewhere that wasn't quite the sky and wasn't quite the earth. Naruto followed the gesture to see a string of lanterns hung along the road. Paper, cheap, inked with messy wishes, some smudged, some bold. I didn't put them there, Kakashi said. Good, Naruto said. I like it better when I don't. A child pushed a lantern into his hands with the solemnity of a priest. You're loud, she said. But not wrong loud. Tamar. I made a face at the theft of her line and then looked like she might be a tiny bit proud to have said something the world had decided to repeat. Naruto hung the lantern on the baton and felt ridiculous. He kept it. They walked back under a sky that had remembered it had decided to be less of a page and more of a place. The city had fixed more than it could count and less than it wanted to. Anko A.M. bushed them with a bucket and made them drink like she had invented water. Sakura shoved a pile of forms at Naruto and said, sign here to agree that human bodies need rest, and he signed because arguing would have made her stronger. At Ichiraku, Tsuki pretended to be shocked at their appetites like he always did. Ayame set bowls with the tenderness of someone laying out blankets for a storm. Naruto ate too fast, then slower when Hinata handed him a cup with her wrist brushing his in a way that made his breath remember how to be patient. Desert, Tamari said around a mouthful, as if it were a direction and a promise and a note pinned to a day in the near future. Soon as winds are talking wrong. Send a letter, Naruto said. He didn't say, I'll come if you ask. He didn't need to. She eared it anyway and clicked her tongue like she had won a bet. Karen stole his egg again and bared teeth when he looked affronted. Pay me in jokes later. Expensive, he said. Quality costs, she said, and leaned into his shoulder like she hadn't. They drifted back to streets that were too familiar not to clean. Naruto swept under the patched awning. The chalk line shone. The old woman with the shawl slid a stone along her stall's edge to keep the wind from slipping paper under it and making it flap like a trapped bird. The kid with the peach pit had invented a new game that involved 2 pits and a bet and had not yet learned to gamble with anything but laughter. Night came on as if it had a schedule and they'd kept it. Lamps swung. The moon stood like a neighbor on her porch with a book, reading the world and not rearranging the furniture. Naruto felt the branches in him steady, not quiet. He put limits on like a jacket he had chosen. He held Mercy close and called it enough. He held his friends closer and called it everything. Hinata's hand found his. He squeezed once because they knew better than to make any moment bigger than it should be before it was ready. Tamari flicked he back of his head with a fingernail and said, go slow, like a threat and a blessing. Tenten wiped oil from her cheekbone and grinned at the way the four-faced had learned to be a belle. Karen made a sound like contempt and fondness at the same time. He couldn't imagine living without either. On a side street, a broom leaned against a wall with bristles splayed. Naruto looked at it and didn't feel victory. He felt wanting, and work, and the kind of happiness that doesn't expect applause. He went to fetch chalk. Chapter 5 End.